Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the DN WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Deku Befriended a Butterfly Hunter. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Gotcha! A body fell on the ground with a loud thud. Small hands cupped against the cool, chipped floor. Pink lips curled upwards into a triumphant smile. Fingers tightening as she shifted backwards to sit on her bottom. Hands still cupped together. Bright, eager red eyes sparkled excitedly as she slowly uncurled her fingers. Then stared when she found empty space between her palms. What the? There was a soft presence on the tip of her nose, and she blinked as a butterfly settled on her nose, waving its deep blue wings. Crimson eyes narrowed, tiny hands flying towards her face, only to cup around her nose as the butterfly fluttered away in the last moment. In a flash, she was on her feet, arms shooting out, and she glared as her fist caught nothing but air. Teeth gritting together in frustration, she boosted upwards, sprinting into the air as she reached for the insect once more. But she tripped, tumbling to the floor in a heap. She frowned, pushing herself on her feet, and soon she was running forward, making her way between the various flower pots in the plant nursery. Mama! The glass door slid open, and small bare feel thudded against the cool pale tiles. Mama! I'm at the counter, Aanne, said girl puffed her cheeks, skipping beside the counter where her mother stood along with another woman, chatting amiably when small fists gripped the edge of her dirt-covered apron, and silver eyes shifted downwards, brows raising on her daughter's childish pout. Where's the butterfly net? Aanne inquired hurriedly, tugging at the apron again. Is she your daughter? The unfamiliar voice catching her attention. Aanne glanced upwards, meeting the soft gaze of the other woman. Silky green hair framed her face, deep emerald eyes gazing down at her as a gentle smile stretched her lips. She's adorable. Yes, her mother smiled back, hand falling down to pat her daughter's head. This is Aanne. Aanne, meet Midoriya-san. She's here to buy some flowers for her apartment. Oh, Inko is fine, Natsumi-chan. The green-haired woman responded softly, gaze falling back to the child once more. Has Aya-chan got her quirk yet? Aanne tapped her foot impatiently, waiting for them to finish their conversion, but blinked as she felt her mother stiffen momentarily, forcing a smile as her fingers threaded into uneven orange locks. Not yet. She's only 5. Me and her father think she's gonna be a late bloomer. No. I understand, Inko nodded in agreement, laughing nervously. My Izuku hasn't got his quirk yet either, she said, then paused, gaze snapping around the flower shop in slight panic. Where is Izuku though? No worries, he might have wandered into the nursery, her mother responded calmly. Aanne, why don't you go and make sure he's all right, HM? Despite wanting to protest, the girl huffed, obliging as she turned around and started to make her way sluggishly towards the nursery. Though she paused near the doorway, a smile splitting her lips when she found the butterfly net lying near the entrance, and she quickly snatched it off, darting in through the open glass doors. Fingers tight around the handle, Aanne crept forward, footsteps suddenly quiet as rusted copper irises glanced around searchingly. She held her breath upon catching sight of another butterfly, drifting downwards near the opposite side of the flower bed. Aanne shifted quietly, alert as her hold tightened once more, and then she lurched into the air, bringing the flying net down with all her might. Gotcha! She cried triumphantly as her feet hit the ground with a loud thud. Her eyes flashed in sheer excitement, a wide toothy grin stretching her lips. But she halted, blinking stupidly as stunned, round green eyes gazed back at her. A mess of mossy green curls sat atop his head, hands curled into fists at his sides as he stood there, staring at her through the fine net, his posture stiff. An awkward beat of silence passed between them, and Aanne realized that he looked awfully like that woman from the counter. There was a flutter of purple near her shoulder, ruby red eyes snapping towards the movement, twinkling upon finding another violet-colored butterfly hovering past them. Within seconds, Aanne had removed the net from the dumbfounded boy's head, and she leapt in the air, swiping the long net. And again she missed by a few inches, tumbling to the ground like before, but crashing into some empty, cracked flower pots this time. The pots fell beside her, her knuckles growing white around the handle in her hand as she clenched her jaw, lying upside down on the floor with her legs propped against the walls and her torso sprawled ungracefully on the cold tiles. Soon red sneakers stepped into her vision, copper eyes peering upwards and soft green hues gazed back, the boy bending forward, and she loosened her grip on the handle when a hand was held out to her. "Are you all right?" he asked worriedly. "You look hurt." Aanne gazed thoughtfully at his open hand, ignoring the painful bump on her head before her eyes flickered hopefully, her posture alert, and the boy let out a startled eep as she quickly scrambled up, bolting past him and pushing herself upwards, curled fingers reaching for the butterfly yet again that lurked dangerously near them. "I'm gonna catch it." A hand shot out, grabbing the back of her orange sweater, and she nearly choked as her whole form was jerked backwards. Sharp gray eyes set her with a heated glare, Natsumi frowning when her daughter continued pushing forward, tiny hands clawing the air as she desperately tried to catch the flying insect. "Mama, let go." "You made a mess," her mother grumbled, pointing towards the disassembled clay pots the girl had knocked into seconds ago. "You'll have to put them back, Aanne." "But Mama, the butterfly." "We'll have to wait." Natsumi slid her hands under the flailing child's armpits, scooping her up in her arms, and turned on her heel before glancing over her shoulder, a soft smile touching her lips. "Come along now, Izuku." Aanne frowned visibly, dropping her chin on her mother's shoulder as she lazily watched the boy Izuku shift nervously on his feet before he moved forward, trailing behind them as they made their way out of the nursery. "This cake is delicious." "Thank you, Inko-chan." "Izuku, will you like some more cake too?" Freckled cheeks colored pink slightly, timid hands reaching out to take the plate held out his way, and Izuku murmured a polite thank you loud enough for the two women sitting before him to hear. Natsumi grinned faintly, holding a cup of warm tea in her hands. "Your son is very shy." "Yes. He gets a little nervous around new people," Inko answered honestly, leaning back in her seat and inhaling the sweet scent of freshly blooming jasmines set near the display window. She sighed blissfully, examining the long beds of colorful flowers welcoming spring in the shop. "Give him some time. He'll be fine." Izuku blushed faintly upon being openly discussed, gaze focusing on the creamy dessert atop his plate before he curiously glanced sideways. Crayons were scattered across the floor, a coloring book thrown open along the pale tiles as Aanne sat, looking still bitter from before as she furiously scrubbed a purple crayon in the character drawn on the book. The color reminded her of thin, sensitive wings fluttering above the sunny daffodils in her mother's nursery, and her jaw clenched, the crayon's thick tip digging into the paper a little. "Why you like All Might?" She paused, staring flatly as Izuku stood before her, fingers twitching at his side in nervousness with his eyes locked on her coloring book. Aanne glanced down at the character, Japan's #1 hero grinning back at her from the paper, and she bounced her small shoulders, resuming and rubbing the crayon haphazardly into the picture once more. "He's all right, I guess. His H hair isn't purple, you know." Aanne halted again, realizing she had been coloring the character's hair wrong. A frown touched her lips, narrowed eyes rising to meet the boy's cautious face, and she bit back a snarl when her mother gave her a warning look from behind him. "Well, it's my favorite color, so there." She stuck her tongue out at him, Izuku blinking back in surprise before she retreated in her coloring, feigning as if he wasn't there at all. She felt his shadow move away a few seconds later, and the orange-haired girl huffed angrily, tuning out her mother's and her new friend's amiable chatter as she reached for a blue crayon. It had been about 3 minutes when she had just finished coloring the teeth, a dark shade of blue, when there was presence before her, closer than before, and she didn't bother to even look up at the boy again. But she stopped as knees rested on the floor in front of her. Izuku offered a friendly smile, cheeks tinted pink as he leaned forward, clasped hands hovering over the ridiculously colored picture of All Might. His hands unclasped gradually, and Aanne held her breath, crimson eyes widening as a butterfly thin, sleek violet wings webbed with intricate silver linings fluttered down, settling between the pages. "You caught one," Aanne breathed out in awe, a look of disbelief on her face. "How'd you do it?" Izuku rubbed the back of his neck abashedly, a shy and flustered smile tugging his lips. "Well, it wasn't that hard," Aanne hummed, fingers slowly sliding under the opposite corners of the coloring book, very careful not to disturb the resting insect. Izuku watched, a look of confusion on his face, as she raised the corners a little before. Slam. Horror crept over his features, his breath hitching while Aanne grinned brightly, squeezing the closed coloring book with both of her hands before she threw it open, displaying the crushed butterfly between the pages, violet and silver smudged across the pages like paint. "Pretty cool, right?" she beamed proudly, though she tilted her to the side, gazing curiously as tears brimmed in those deep green orbs, a hiccup leaving Izuku's lips as he screeched in horror. "Why'd you do that?" he cried out, reaching out to cradle the crumbling butterfly in his hands. "Why would you do that?" Aanne stared owlishly at the tears streaming down his freckled cheeks. "Geez, it's just a butterfly." "Aanne," she winced visibly. "What did you do now?" "I didn't do anything, Mama." Crimson eyes wandered around the living room, pausing on the flower pots near the entrance of the gallery they had just walked through before coming to settle on the cups before them, watching steam rise from the tea before a hand reached forward, slipping a cookie from the pile on the plate, and Aanne bit into the cookie thoughtfully. "Wonder if they have a skateboard." "I'm so sorry for what she did," her mother spoke apologetically, hands cupping the hot teacup between her palms. "Poor Izuku. He was crying so much." "It's all right." Inko rubbed the back of her neck, offering an assuring smile. "They're kids. It happens. But, still. Please stop apologizing, Natsumi-chan. You're embarrassing me." "It's just that," the woman sighed heavily, leaning back in the creamy-colored couch, fingers clenching the cup harder than before. "Aanne isn't used to having children around her. Me and her father don't want her starting school till she gets her quirk, so I thought maybe having your son around would help her be more social." A loud crunch echoed in the air, followed by a muffled sound, and pairs of green and gray turned to the source, Aanne staring back with both cheeks puffed and lips spilling cookie crumbs, tiny hands holding onto a muffin already. Inko cooed softly, giggling while Natsumi rolled her eyes in amusement, wiping a napkin across her daughter's lips. "Don't stuff your face like that. It's rude." "But it's so good," the child protested through a mouthful, desperately trying to swallow it all as Inko laughed, a hand held delicately to her lips. "I don't know what you're saying, Shizu-san. Ayakin is adorable." Aanne grinned brightly at the comment, showing a line of chocolate-covered teeth, and Natsumi pinched the bridge of her nose, setting her daughter with a pressing look. "Have you apologized to Izuku yet, Aanne?" Her grin faltering, Aanne clamped her mouth shut, crimson eyes glancing sideways. "No, but it wasn't my fault. Go and apologize." "But, Mama." "Now, Aanne." Inko watched worriedly as the girl pursed her lips, tiny fingers digging into the muffin as she slid off the couch, feet hitting the floor with a thud before Natsumi began speaking again, gray eyes searching for the familiar mop of green locks. "Where is Izuku, though?" "He's in his room," the green-haired woman answered, folding her hands in her lap as she smiled at her guest. There's no need for this. Really, they're just kids. You heard her, Aanne. Natsumi interjected, fixing her daughter with a cold look. Go and apologize to the boy. Please tell her where his room is, Inko-chan. Oh, just down to the right, Aanne, honey. Eyes on the orange-haired girl, they watched as she dipped her head into a nod, making her way towards the line of doors ahead. A minute of silence passed in the room, the faint sound of a door clicking shut echoing from within the apartment, and Inko chewed her bottom lip, gazing at the spot from where the young child had moved. Don't you think you're too hard on her, Natsumi-chan? Fingers sliding into the hook of her teacup. The scarlet-haired woman brought the rim close to her lips, only to gently blow at the steam hovering above the hot beverage. We all have to be a little strict with children these days, no. The door falling shut behind her with a faint click. Aanne chewed the insides of her cheeks. The muffin in her hand crumbling for her fingers went taut around it as a frown curled her lips downwards. Why should I say sorry when I didn't do anything? She growled mentally, fisting the edges of her yellow skirt. Fear not, citizens. The sudden laugh startled her, fiery hues shooting upwards, and she blinked once, then twice, finally taking in her surroundings. Multiple posters were pasted across the white walls, the shelves heavy with the same face heck. Even the bed set matched as the same voice boomed from within the room. Aanne tilted her head to the side, curiously gazing at the silhouette of light from the chair near the bed. Because I am here. She slowly stalked forward, footsteps falling silent on the carpet stretched across the floor as she reached the chair, weight shifting on her toes before wide, curious eyes peered into the flashing screen, only to come face to face with Japan's #1 hero. His smile ran miles across his face as he held onto multiple people while fire roared behind him. But crimson hues flashed brightly, quickly detecting the thin, almost unnoticeable stream of red, such a pretty color blood dripping down his chin. He's going to die, she announced quietly. A loud, startled eep erupted through the air, then followed with the computer chair reeling backwards, but hands shot out, grabbing onto the armrest, forcefully pulling the chair back on its feet before Aanne dropped her chin on the cold steel of the armrest, gazing at the pair of wide, round emerald eyes staring down at her in bewilderment. How did you get inside? Izuku questioned finally, back flattered against the foam of his computer chair in absolute fright. Aanne stepped back, the chair letting out a loud wheeze on the absence of the extra weight. She faintly remembered the times her mother had scolded her for creeping on her from behind. You're going to give me a heart attack, Natsumi had grumbled, wiping at the juice spilled over the floor, and the girl shrugged shamelessly. I came in through the door. Oh, the boy relaxed, slumping in his seat, yet his gaze never left her. I didn't hear you. She hummed in answer, turning her head to the laptop atop the desk where the screen showed All Might's smiling face, the same blood trickling down his jawline. Aanne made a sound in the back of her throat, eyes wandering over the posters again. You really like All Might, huh? Who wouldn't though? Izuku responded easily, a smile tugging the ends of his lips upwards on hearing about his favorite hero as he hopped off the chair, and Aanne realized she was about 3 inches taller than him. He's the coolest person in the universe. He shot a fist in the air, Aanne focusing on the miniature version of All Might in his curled fingers. I didn't know boys played with dolls. And I'm gonna be just like him one day. So you wanna die? Izuku's brows furrowed in confusion, and Aanne jabbed her thumb at the laptop screen. Papa says that if blood comes out of your mouth, it means that you're dying. She watched, amused as the greenette sputtered incoherently, then protested about how All Might couldn't die of something like this, all the while shaking the doll around before he blinked once, surprised as she snatched the toy away in the blink of an eye. This is a weird doll, she mused loudly, inspecting the toy while Izuku let out a cry of protest. It's not a doll. It's an action figure. She bounced her shoulders nonchalantly, handing the toy back before turning to further look around his room. Blue, white, red and big, wide grins greeted her from everywhere, and she glanced over her shoulder. "Have you got your quirk yet?" "Well, not yet," he admitted nervously, mossy green eyes glittering with sudden excitement as the corners of his mouth pulled upwards into a grin. "But all the other kids in my class have, so I'm definitely gonna get mine soon too." "I haven't got my quirk yet too," Aanne responded honestly, leaning against his bed. "Aren't you excited for it? Maybe we'll end up getting a combination of our parents' quirks." "My parents don't have quirks." Silence descended on them, Izuku blinking at her in sheer confusion, mouth turning into an O shape as he slowly digested the information. A bare minute passed, then aloud. "What? That's not possible." "I dunno," Aanne shrugged, grabbing the bed sheet as she climbed atop the mattress. "But my mama and papa don't have any quirks." Are you sure?" Izuku inquired hurriedly, scampering up as well. He seated himself near the foot of the mattress, green orbs wide and round with curiosity. "Maybe they have a quirk and just want to make it a surprise for you when you get yours." Aanne's brows creased as she kicked the air, the heels of her sock-clad feet hitting the mattress with faint thumps. "I don't mind not having a quirk." "What? Don't say that." "Well, yeah, it's not like I want to be a hero or anything." "You don't want to be a hero." The amount of surprise in his voice made her turn her head to the boy seated away from her, thin legs crossed as he gazed down at her in wonderment and surprise. Aanne arched a brow, dark orange braid whipped out from behind her as she lay on her back. "Do you want to be a hero?" He nodded vigorously, fidgeting in his spot. "Yeah, I want to be the #1 pro hero ever. Just like All Might." Aanne let out a hum, staring up at the ceiling, which had to be the only place safe from posters and hero merchandise. She felt the boy shift, curious eyes peeking down at her. Ayakin. The nickname had her propping up on her elbows, sharp ruby red eyes snapping his way, and he flushed brightly, eyes darting around everywhere as if not wanting me to meet her gaze before he took a quiet inhale, collecting his courage while forest green irises focused on her. "Why don't you want to be a hero?" A fingers reached upwards, curling around orange locks, and Aanne tugged at the end of her messy braid, legs tucked underneath her as she sat before the boy, mulling over the question a few times in her head. And she shrugged reluctantly. "I don't know," she answered, a thoughtful look on her face. "I'm gonna own Mama's flower shop when I grow up. Take care of the nursery too. That's all I want to do." Crimson hues flickered momentarily, Aanne letting the words slip from her tongue cautiously. "Is that okay, Izuku-kun?" A soft blush crept up freckled cheeks, Izuku releasing a low squeak as he buried his face in his hands, nodding quickly. Aanne sniggered, finding his reaction funny as she gazed around searchingly. "Do you have any coloring books?" An eye peeked between slim fingers. "No, I don't." Hope lighting up her eyes, she spoke up again. "Do you have a skateboard?" Izuku shook his head, dropping his hands on his lap as he offered an apologetic smile. "No." Aanne blew a raspberry, swinging her legs impatiently. "I'm so bored." "You want to play pretend instead?" She blinked, tilting her head to the side. "Pretend?" "Yeah," Izuku grinned brightly, tugging the hoodie over his head, and Aanne stared at the ridiculous yellow rabbit ears that popped up in the air. "I'll be All Might. You can be your favorite superhero." "Favorite superhero?" Aanne contemplated over his offer, then took the edges of his comforter in her hands, pulling the covers around her in a hood that fell over her eyes. "I'll be the victim you can save." She smiled under the shadows of the comforter, pleased with her character as she wailed dramatically. "Help me." But hands gripped the edges of the blue covers, pushing it off from her head, and surprised, scarlet eyes peered upwards, meeting dark green as Izuku offered a soft smile. Or you can just be my partner instead. Aanne stared flatly, growing silent before green orbs widened at the close proximity. And he jerked back on the mattress, face hot as he sputtered, hiding his face behind his hands. Sorry. My mom's usually the one who does that. Maybe you want to be someone else? A soft smile touching her lips. She beamed happily. Sure. But I'm not wearing the bunny ears. Be bunny ears? These are not bunny ears. Plate clacked slightly as they were stacked together, worried eyes wandering back to the doorways again and again, before a heavy sigh filled the air, and she gripped the plate tighter, giving a nervous smile. It's been a while. I hope the kids are okay. Inko voiced her thoughts. I'm sure they are, Natsumi said coolly, collecting the teacups as well. Aanne is going to be in a lot of trouble if she makes him cry again. Bottom lip trapped between her teeth, Inko contemplated whether she should check on the children or not. But both women stilled, startled as there was the sound of a door being thrown open from near before a figure of blue and yellow jumped into their line of sight, arms raised and chest puffed. I am here. They continued to stare down at Izuku, Inko smiling, while Natsumi looked baffled as the boy planted his tiny fists on his hips, glancing behind him. Come on, Ayakan. We've got citizens to save. All might. A head of messy orange-haired appeared, and Aanne hopped beside the other child, a blue mask framing her eyes and a long, white bed sheet tied around her neck as she waved the edges around like a cape. Let's go. The two darted forward with what seemed to battle cries, and Inko sniffed, tears brimming in her eyes. They're so adorable. Natsumi watched the scene quietly, opening and closing her mouth as if mimicking a fish before cold. Gray hues softened, and she smiled warmly as her daughter tripped over the bed sheet, only to push herself up again and continuing to follow around the boy as they faced whatever invisible opponents. I need to get my camera. This'll make such cute photos. Inko-chan. She halted, gaze moving towards the woman seated on the couch who stared ahead, hands neatly folded in her lap. Have you taken Izuku to the doctor yet? Inko blinked, shifting on her feet as she glanced at her son's way, heart warming on seeing the bright, happy grin on his face as she answered honestly. I plan on taking him this week, actually. Other children in his class have already started showing signs of their quirk. Maybe he'll be a late bloomer too. Maybe, Natsumi responded calmly, leaning back in her seat. I took Aanne for a checkup as well. They say she's absolutely fine and her quirk is supposed to be showing already, but... Fingers dug into fiery red locks, and Inko looked on in surprise as Natsumi tugged at her hair in frustration, a deep scowl gracing her features. Please don't be like us. I don't see any signs of a quirk in her. Sounds. They were everywhere. Loud, soft, harsh, and she could hear them if she concentrated enough, but truth be told, a headache came rushing soon with it. Children walked by, chattering and laughing, their school shoes thudding away on the pavement below, while cars whirred with their engines, driving past the flower shop as the wind teased through the roses decorated outside, bright colorful petals shivering with each gust as the clouds continued sailing through the sunny sky. Small hands clamped down on ears, face pressing flat against the cool glass of the door before ruby-red irises peered upwards, desperately trying to find the bird hidden away in the dense leaves of the tree right in front of the shop. I can hear it so clearly, Aanne mused, squinting up at the cherry tree once more. The faint chirping vibrated in her eardrums, and surely the bird was somewhere in the mess of pink leaves, hidden away from sight. With a quick glance over her shoulder, Aanne tugged the door open, wincing when the bell above chimed noisily, and she held her breath for a second. But no one yelled at her from behind, so she let a mischievous smirk curl her lips, stepping outside the shop. Warm pavement greeted her bare feet as she stood outside, the door falling back in place behind her, while she observed a pair of two schoolgirls walk by. navy blue blazers and black bags slung over their shoulders as they giggled together, chatting amiably as they pushed forward. Aanne watched them cross the road, briefly remembering when she had asked Izuku if the kids in his class picked on him or not, because that was the only reason her mother always gave her when she wailed about going to school as well. No quirk, no school. Natsumi had snapped furiously one day, and Aanne could still see Izuku move about uncertainly on hearing her question, then quietly answer that no, he didn't get picked on. I have a lot of friends, he had proclaimed proudly. I'm part of the Bakugo Hero Agency too. Whatever that meant. Aanne snapped out of her thoughts quickly, the quiet melody of the mystery bird hitting her ears once more. She stalked forward, eyes locked on a certain branch within the cluster of pink leaves as nails dug into the thick bark. And with a push, she was climbing upwards, finding her footing with great ease, while the thought of how she had never climbed a tree before never crossed her mind. Sunlight peeked through the pink petals, casting the soft glow of a blush across pale skin as Aanne leaned on her palms and knees, scarlet eyes growing round in awe as the bird sat perched a distance away. Deep blue feathers, colored with darker shades, adorned its fragile body, and an unrecognizable emotion flickered within her chest, crimson eyes darkening as they set themselves on the aloof bird. A low growl slipped through the morning air, nails digging deep into the quivering branch below, and a shadow moved forward swiftly, followed by a loud squawk of pain. Blue feathers drifted downwards, soaked with fresh blood, as they soundlessly landed on the cemented pavement below. Faster, faster, faster. Bare feet hit the concrete rapidly, fingers curling in the cuffs of the thin strawberry-themed sweater as Aanne darted down the street, ragged breaths leaving her lips as she pushed forward. Adrenaline rushed through her veins, and she gripped her sweater tight, bloody fingers staining the nearly worn-out fabric as she turned a corner, orange braid whipping behind her as she entered the new street. Just one more block. Her mother was going to be furious, but the sense of excitement and fear filling her was too much as she grinned toothily, ignorant of the way the warm spring wind blew at her face. The oversized sweater bunched around her as she bolted between the people, heart hammering inside her chest. I need to tell him. Someone yelled at her to stop, only making her pick up more speed, if that was even possible, because she had never ran so fast in her life. Her chest heaved, breathless as she bolted in the 3-story building, small legs still pumping as she made her way up the staircase. She was going to deal with exhaustion once she finally relaxed. But right now she was busy recalling the address, her feet sliding into a sudden halt, and Aanne nearly toppled over. The door stood before her, the address so clear in her mind as she impatiently raised a fist, knocking at the hard wood a couple of times, then punching in the doorbell once or twice for good measure as well. Aanne rocked back on the balls of her heels, feet dirty and hurting. The doorknob twisted open, the door shifting inside, and she raised her tiny fists slightly, lips stretched into a happy grin. I think I got my... But she paused, staring flatly at the pair of watery green eyes, focusing her with a look of shock and utter confusion. Ayakan? Midoriya Inko echoed surprisingly. What are you doing here all by yourself? Does Shizu-san know that you're here? Why are you crying? Inko blinked, tears silently sliding down her cheeks before she rushed to wipe her face. Aanne curled her fingers, watching as the woman put on a happy facade, shooting a friendly smile. Of course I'm not crying, goodness. Is that blood? The taste of copper on her tongue reminded Aanne of why she was here. But a hand flattened against her back, ushering her inside the house urgently. Why is there blood on you? Are you hurt, sweetie? I'll get the first aid kit. Wait right here. Aanne wiped the blood caked around her lips with the sleeve of her sweater, while Inko hurriedly sped inside the kitchen, rambling in panic, and Aanne turned, making her way towards the familiar room. She didn't bother to knock, pushing the already ajar door open as a proud grin split her lips. Guess what, Izuku-kun? I think I finally got my... her mouth instantly clamped shut, eyes snapping to the hunched-over figure lying on the mattress. A sob reeked through the quiet air, the mess of blue blankets on the bed shaking, loud whimpers echoing off the room walls, and Aanne blinked once, taking in the image before her as her feet moved on their own. "Izuku-kun," she whispered, nearing the bed. A hand rose outwards, small bloody fingers brushing against the bundle of blankets. "What's wrong?" A head popped out, wild green locks coming into view before Izuku gripped the bedsheet tight, knuckles white, while his eyes went round like twin moons, freezing. "Ayakon, what are you doing here?" Hot tears slid down his face, dripping down his chin, and Aanne felt sudden pain grip her heart. The only time she recalled seeing anyone cry was her mother, and that too was when she had turned 4 and had shown no signs of a quirk. But the boy before her had a look of pure agony and pain etched on his face. A bloodied, cold finger brushed against his cheek, fingertip trailing the warm tears spilling down his face in steady streams. Something inside Aanne stirred, crimson eyes sharpening. "What's wrong?" Izuku choked on a sob, head tipping forward as a curtain of curly green hair curtained his watery eyes. He sucked in a shaky breath, tiny hands curling into tight fists in his lap. "I'm broken." Aanne stared flatly as she caught the glimpse of a tear dripping down from his chin. "I'm broken, Ayakon. You don't look broken to me." "I'm quirkless," he croaked, explaining himself while Aanne bit her bottom lip. "Izuku-kun." His jaw clenched, entire body shaking, as he whimpered into the darkness of his room. "I'll never have a quirk. But you know what?" Puffy, tear-brimmed eyes turned towards her, and Aanne felt that strange and unfamiliar ache in her chest again when Izuku grinned broadly, tears spilling and voice heavy. "I'll still be hero. Even if I don't have a quirk, I'll still be a hero. I'll... His voice broke, hiccups leaving his throat as he cupped his hands, sobbing into his palms. "I'll still be a hero, Ayakon." Red hues softened, arms coiling around the sobbing boy as Aanne shifted on the mattress, holding him tight while being careful of her bloodied fingers. He whimpered, tears continuing to fall while sobs reeked his entire form. Aanne shut her eyes, burying her face in the mess of ruly, green locks before she murmured softly, "It's okay, Izuku-kun. 'Cause I don't have a quirk either." Never tell lies. The first thing her father had told when he sat down to tutor her on simple kindergarten mathematics. She didn't know how his advice related to their subject, but listening to him speak about morals and how she should always behave at home was far more interesting than the boring additions on her textbook. Her father had made clear that day that she should never lie to him or her mother, and everything would go fine as long as she were always truthful. So right. She had broken rule number 1. But it wouldn't be a problem as long as no one found out about her newfound quirk, right? It wasn't like she wanted to be a pro hero anyway. All she had to do was to keep it hidden. But do I want to hide it? Aanne gazed down thoughtfully at her dirt-covered hands, small palms lying open in her lap as she rested on the pale tiles, a bed of freshly blooming scarlet roses before her. A bee buzzed somewhere from afar, the sound echoing in her ears briefly before she tuned it out, focusing on the alluring mess of crimson in front of her instead. A hand reached outwards, nimble fingers slowly tracing the soft red petals, then gliding downwards across the green stem. Green. The familiar color reeling her mind back to wild, unkept curly locks and big, round glassy emerald orbs, brimming heavily with tears. "Oh." Aanne winced, recoiling as she pulled her arm back. Blood oozed out from her fingertip, dripping down her hand as crimson eyes flickered momentarily with an unrecognizable look, and she brought the finger close to her face. A raspy pink tongue slipping out from between her small lips, and she licked the trickling liquid slowly. Her eyes brightened, a familiar feeling uncurling in the pit of her stomach as she tasted metal on her tongue. And it tasted good. "Aanne." The orange-haired girl jolted, nearly biting down on her finger as she twisted around, staring owlishly as her gaze crossed green eyes shaper, colder than Izuku's softer hues, and she pulled her finger out of her mouth, back going stiff. A beat of silence passed. A curious look settled on her, and then the black-haired man shifted closer, peering over her head as she coiled her hand into a tiny fist. "Aya," his deep voice spoke up again, brows furrowing. "What happened to your hand?" Ruby hues peered upwards upon hearing the nickname, meeting jade-sharp eyes that regarded her coolly, and her father strolled closer, only to crouch down beside her. Aanne chewed the insides of her cheeks as a hand was held out towards her. Fujimo watched as his daughter reached out gingerly, letting her small hand fall in his larger one. He spread her palm wide, running his rough thumb along the thin red stain running along her softer skin. "I pricked it on a thorn." Aanne felt the warmth of the man's hands as they cupped around her small one, and she swallowed as sharp-cut emeralds set themselves on her, gaze piercing. Fujimo squeezed her hand within his. "Think you've got your quirk yet, Aya?" Tears and choked sobs echoed in her ears, and she shook her head quickly, heart thrumming as she felt her father's grip loosen around her tiny fist. A beat of silence, then an almost desperate, "Are you sure, Aya? Tell him. Tell him. Tell him." "Yes, Papa," she responded smoothly, peering upwards through messy orange locks. His eyes were tense, shoulders taut as she let the lie flow smoothly from between her teeth. "I don't feel like I'm ever gonna have a quirk, though. You can't let Izuku-kun be alone." And then the hands enclosing her fist tightened so hard it hurt, and Fujimo's jaw clenched visibly, his tone admonishing. "Don't say things like that." Arms suddenly circled around her, drawing her in close, and Aanne blinked, face pressed against a broad, hard chest. Cigarette smoke mixed with the scent of sharp cologne wafted off his blue uniform, burning her nose before fingers weaved into orange locks, tugging her in more, and Fujimo dropped his chin atop her head, hugging his daughter tight. "You're gonna have a quirk," he mumbled, rubbing soothing circles on her back. "You're not gonna be like me or your mother. You will have a quirk, and then you're gonna be a hero, and you'll make us both proud." Tiny hands fisted the fabric of his blue uniform, Aanne squeezing her eyes shut as she buried her face in her father's jacket, wondering if her parents cried like Izuku did when they were told they were broken too. Ayakin, slow down. Feet thumped away on the sidewalk, then quickly halted. Weight shifted back onto her other leg, bright crimson eyes glancing backwards as a frown curled Aanne's lips, while Izuku bent ahead, hands on his knees as he breathed heavily. "You're so fast," the boy whined, catching his breath. "I'm not fast," Aanne protested, fixing the pink beanie on her head as she stuck her tongue out at him. "You're just slow." The chilly autumn wind blew around them, tugging at locks of green and orange, while Izuku tipped his head back with a sigh before puffing his freckled cheeks. "Can't we go a little slower?" Aanne rolled her eyes, shifting the worn-out skateboard in her hands once, only to tuck it beneath her armpit before she reached towards Izuku's side, hand easily sliding into his, and she confidently tugged him forward, ignoring how his cheeks colored feverishly. "You gotta keep up with everyone," she announced, turning her head to shoot him a bright smile while he tried to keep up with her fast pace. "Quirk or no quirk, you can't fall behind, Izuku-kun." Mossy green hues stared in surprise, before they softened as Izuku let a gentle smile touch his lips, his warm fingers curling around her cold palm. His gaze dipped downwards, curiosity sparking up on seeing the skateboard tucked away under her arm, and he couldn't help but question. "They finally got you a skateboard." "Oh, this." Aanne released his hand, taking the skateboard in her hands and grinning broadly. "Nah. I found this in the dumpster." "Dumpster?" Izuku echoed, eyes round and brows furrowed, as he inspected the board closely. Cracks and bumps on the old wood greeted him, his gaze quickly snapping to Aanne's proud smile. I don't think it's safe, Ayako. The girl bounced her shoulders, intensely focused on the sorry excuse of a skateboard in her hands. She could vaguely remember asking for one of those shiny, new skateboards they showed a lot in those advertisements on her 6th birthday last month. But her mother had merely hummed, picking up wilting tulips from last spring, and her father grumble about how birthdays simply meant how they were 1 year closer to dying. Her turning a year older had seemingly put them in a sour mood, and she had caught her mother weeping into her father's shoulder, murmuring how she had turned out like both of them. "We're here." The loud exclamation snapped Aanne out of her thoughts, ruby red eyes taking in their surroundings. The trees stood miserably, a mess of golden and copper-colored leaves beneath their naked branches, while the flower beds lay bare, only dirt and not even a petal in sight. The cool, crisp wind blew at both their faces, teasing through Izuku's curls and whipping back her French braid hanging loosely behind her. And suddenly, autumn was her least favorite season. "This," Aanne began unsurely, "is the park?" "Yep," Izuku nodded vigorously, skipping ahead. "Let's find a place where you can use that skateboard and not get hurt." Aanne cradled the skateboard between her palms, trudging forward on the cemented pathway. Her breath hitched as she heard the fallen leaves crunch loudly beneath her feet, the sound ringing in her ears for a moment as a small smile tugged the ends of her lips upwards. "Izuku, isn't this cool?" She collided into a body, the fragile skateboard clattering to the pavement below, while Aanne rubbed her nose, glaring at the head of the green-haired boy before her, because even if they were a year older now, she was still taller than him. And then she noticed how Izuku was almost frozen, his form stiff and breathing slow, so she stepped beside him, perplexed. "Izuku?" She tilted her head to the side, noting how his eyes were round like marbles and something fear. It was definitely fear flickered in those forest green orbs as his mouth opened and closed like a fish. Aanne decided to follow his gaze, staring ahead as well. Spiky, ash blonde hair and slanting blood-red eyes greeted her. A deep scowl etched onto the other boy's face, and Aanne glanced back at Izuku's stiffened form, curious of why he was trembling all of a sudden. For some reason, it seemed things were going to get a little livelier now. There was a sudden scent in the autumn air, accompanying the chilly wind. The image of the aloof bird flashed across her mind, its painful squawk filling her ears, and she barely remembered the same stench clouding around her. Aanne shifted on her feet, taking a small sniff of the alarming atmosphere as her gaze settled on Izuku. He swallowed thickly, somehow shivering under his thick green jacket as he stammered. "Kakakin." Fear. That's what it was, wafting off the green-haired boy in waves, curling around them all like a dense cloud, and the other boy, Kakin, scowled heavily, staring down Izuku as if he was ready to eat him alive. "Deku," he spat out disgustingly. Aanne blinked, brows furrowing in confusion as she echoed back. "Deku?" Izuku flinched visibly when she uttered the word, but it seemed to catch the blonde boy's attention too. Slanted blood-red eyes set her with a dissecting look, a scowl etched on the blonde's face. "Who the fuck is this?" "Ayako? My name's Aanne," she answered coolly, leveling with the boy's heated glare before she peeked above his head, spotting 2 boys behind him. The sight of red bat wings greeted her for a second, when Kakin barked out a laugh, tiny fists planted on his hips as he tipped his head forward with a menacing grin. "So shitty Deku is playing with girls now, huh?" Izuku sputtered an incoherent explanation behind her, burning pink while the lackeys behind Kakin chortled, throwing in comments about cooties and making gagging noises, but Aanne narrowed her eyes, ignoring them completely as she huffed, hands gravitating to her own hips. "His name isn't Deku," she stuck her tongue out at them. "It's Izuku, you dummies." The 2 standing behind stared at her owlishly, their laughter dying out, and Aanne smirked confidently, puffing her chest out with pride while Kakin breathed out angrily, his warm breath coming out as clouds of white in the chilly air as he tightened his fists, a snarl tugging his lips. The fuck it is. He's nothing but a lousy, good-for-nothing, broken Deku. Blah, blah, blah. Aanne waved her hand in the air reluctantly, ignoring the hot-headed blonde who was busy grinding his teeth together as she glanced over her shoulder briefly. Izuku gazed back at her, surprise evident on his face, and she turned back again, unconsciously inhaling again, only to find the thick scent of fear dissipating, so she grinned triumphantly, brushing off Kaken's murderous glare as she bent downwards, reaching for the fallen skateboard. My papa says barking dogs don't bite. So why don't you all just leave me and Izuku alone? A hand shot out, grabbing the jagged skateboard before her fingers had even grazed it, and Aanne's gaze darted to the snatcher, a frown curling her lips. Crimson eyes watched, puzzled as the ends of Kaken's lips quirked into a cocky smirk as he held the skateboard between his hands, fingers digging in the worn-out wood. Smoke wafted out from his palms, and within seconds a loud boom echoed out in the air, the sound ringing achingly in Aanne's ears as she stood there, something cold pressing into the side of her skull as Kaken drew his hands back, the smirk firmly plastered on his face as chunks of the skateboard fell to his feet. That big enough of a bite for you? Izuku had shouted something, but she couldn't really make his words out, too occupied with the sound of blood pumping up to her ears as Aanne lurched forward, slamming straight into the blonde. Two bodies rolled onto the yellowing grass, the cold wind nipping at their noses, and Aanne stiffened her muscles, ending up sitting upright on the boy's stomach as she raised her fist in the air, tears wetting the corners of her eyes. But a hand halted near her face, a wide-open palm greeting her before fireworks crackled along the smooth skin, and an explosion sent her flying backwards. She slid across the grass, ash in her mouth and smoke in her watery eyes, while Bakugo hopped back to his feet, eyes promising murder as he grinned broadly. Ha! Should have known you'd be broken like Deku too. Broken. Aanne staggered up, finding her footing as she clenched her jaw tight. I'm not broken. Blood-red hues flickered, something almost primal flashing in those ruby-red orbs, and Aanne charged forward like an angry bull, bolting past a flailing Izuku, and she ducked when Bakugo's sizzling fist came careening at her head. Pitch-black smoke blasted through the air, the sound of the explosion alerting bystanders, while instead of dodging, Aanne twisted around, opening her mouth wide and brought her teeth down on the blonde's arm. A flurry of explosions broke out from gloved hands, following a painful hiss leaving from Bakugo's lips, while Aanne's eyes hardened, and she sunk her teeth deeper into his arm, until a loud snap rang in the air. The metallic blood hit her tongue, an unfamiliar feeling coiling in the pit of her tongue, as red liquid stained across the blonde's orange sweater. Fuck. Get off. The same hand grabbed her face this time, the onslaught of explosions burning her skin, but she dug her heels into the dying grass, eyes screwing shut as she tightened her jaw, feeling her teeth touch bone, but something slid around her waist, yanking hard, but she clung on desperately. And then amidst the fireworks shooting off in her face, forceful tugs trying to throw her away, there were thin fingers digging in the sleeve of her sweater, shaking her in horror. Iaken. Let Kaken go. She loosened her hold, parting her mouth, and a blinding explosion hit her, making her whole form jerk backwards. The long, thin fingers of one of those boys uncoiled from her waist, both of them ushering to Bakugo's side, who stood cursing, cradling a broken arm with a half-torn sweater, tears brimming in the corner of his eyes. Aanne pushed herself upright by her palms, talon-like fingers stabbing deep into the dirt below as a deep growl escaped from her throat, eyes flashing from behind unruly orange bangs, and she let a snarl pull her lips back, bearing sharp, bloodied canines. She wiped a hand across her face, rubbing away the soot from her eyes before she straightened her back, readying to pounce once more. But a figure stepped before her, the thick blanket of fear curling around her again. But she inhaled deeply this time, letting the scent fill her lungs and light something inside her. Kill, kill, kill. crimson eyes darkened with bloodlust. A growl slipping past blood-dripping lips, and Aanne surged ahead, forcibly tackling the body against the ground. A hand caught her wrist as her own fingers wounded around a throat, her other hand rising into the air, nails sharp and pointed, all set on piercing through flesh as the stench of fear intensified again. Two hands clasped her wrist tight, shaking in terror, and she blinked once, then twice because pools of green, brimming with tears and anger and fear, gazed back at her. No, not you. Her hold slackened instantly, heart wrenching in her chest painfully as realization colored her eyes. Don't be scared. Izuku gasped out, jerking his head backwards as she withdrew her hand, pushing herself on the ground as quick, hurried footsteps made their way towards them. Voices filled in the air, people crowding around them, talking aloud as Aanne settled down, breathless and exhausted, miserable scarlet eyes drifting from Izuku's panting form to the chunks of burnt wood lying far away from them. I want a fucking rematch. Katsuki clenched his fist, wincing when pain shot up his casted arm. He leaned against the hospital wall, eyes ablaze as he peered behind his screeching mother, fixing the orange-haired girl with a frosty glare. But she didn't even budge, a curtain of tousled, unkempt orange locks hiding away her eyes as she seemed to stare downwards, gaze fixed on the pale tiles of the hallway they all were standing in. Or in his mother's case, screaming her lungs out. Look what your brat did to Katsuki. I'm fucking fine, you old hag. His father waved his hands around nervously, speaking more quietly than his mother. Mitsuki, can you please keep it down a bit? Of course, you're not fucking fine, Mitsuki retorted, shooting her son a heated glare to which he responded by snarling back at her. Her hand slammed down on his head, Bakugo hissing as he was shoved towards the scarlet-haired woman standing before them. She broke his fucking arm. How the hell is he going to do his schoolwork now? Let go of me, you witch. Can you two please keep it down? You're scaring the other patients. I am so sorry, Bakugo-san. Natsumi clasped her hands together, biting down her bottom lip. Really? Aanne seemed to manifest her quirk. She didn't hurt the boy on purpose. I don't give a damn. You're paying for the hospital bill. What? Well, your son has injured her too. She has severe burns on her skin. You should pray they don't scar. Otherwise, how will she ever get married? I don't give a flying fuck. Mitsuki, language please. Natsumi straightened her spine, eyes darkening as she crossed her arms over her chest arrogantly. In case you don't know, Bakugo-san, my husband is the police commissioner, so you better watch your tongue. Oh, you want to fight me? Mitsuki questioned threateningly, yanking the sleeves up both of her arms as she signaled towards herself. Come at me, I fucking dare you. Katsuki rolled his eyes while his father held his mother back, the other woman looking unamused, and his gaze drifted back to the source of all the problem. She was still standing there like a statue, not moving a muscle, and he scowled, because of course that good-for-nothing Deku was bound to have a weird friend as him. Who'd be that loser's friend anyway? Sorry for being late, a new voice quipped, and the blonde glanced upwards, watching a man step beside the red-haired woman. Sharp, green eyes regarded them all coolly, black hair slicked back as the man adjusted the blazer of his navy blue uniform. His gaze dipped downwards, crossing Katsuki's, and the boy narrowed his eyes challengingly, but the man focused on the white cast supporting his arm instead, then turned to look at his parents. I was a bit preoccupied. A fist dug into Katsuki's hair again, making him wince as his mother shook him pointedly. This is your daughter's fault. I see. Fujimo responded quietly, and then he took a step backwards before bowing down, shadows casting along his face with his arms stiff at his sides. I apologize for what Aya has done. We will pay for all the damage. Mitsuki snorted, finally letting go of his hair, and Katsuki inched away from her, grumbling curses, and then his father was talking again, blabbering apologies like always. Shizu-san, please, it's all right. You don't have to, really. Fujimo stood upright, ignoring the man completely as he shifted his weight on his other foot. His wife's gaze trailing after him as he neared Aanne, who continued standing still, only to flinch when her father sighed. Aya, he began calmly, leaning downwards slightly. Did you lie to me when I asked you about your quirk? Katsuki raised his brows, not quite sure what the question meant, while the girl sucked in her bottom lip, finally showing some movement as she hesitantly peeked upwards, albeit shrinking under the sharp, tense gaze of her father. PFT. Was she scared? No wonder she's friends with Deku of all people. I've asked you something, Aya. He pressed coldly. Did you lie? She seemed to chew the insides of her cheeks, avoiding her gaze as she glanced sideways. No, Papa, I didn't. The loud thwack that followed caught them all off guard, a sudden whip of orange locks falling across Aanne's pale face as she blinked up at the wall, feeling her taped cheek throb because of her father's rough palm hitting her patched-up skin. Something warm and wet drizzled down her face, and she swallowed down the hiccups wanting to leave her lips as she clenched her fists together tight. Her father let out a breath before her, unfazed, and Katsuki kept on staring, trying to digest what had just happened when his mother exploded beside him. The fuck did you hit the kid for? Mistuki hissed furiously, marching towards the whimpering girl. They're just kids, god damn it. You made her fucking cry, bastard. She paused, jaw clenching, because Natsumi stepped between her and her husband, eyes cold like steel as she frowned deeply. Don't teach us on how to raise our child. Fujimo cleared his throat, catching their attention once more as he reached ahead, hand clasping around Aanne's forearm, and nodded his head at them. Sorry for the inconvenience. I'll pay up the bill at the reception. Come along, Natsumi. With that, he moved forward, tugging Aanne along, who stumbled over her own feet, and Katsuki's gaze somehow met hers for a split second, blood red clashing with coppery hues for the briefest of moments, enough to notice the fear coloring her face. And in that moment, she really looked like someone who could be friends with that useless Deku. She crouched down on the marble stairs, the cold breeze nipping at her nose as a hand reached outwards, fingers plucking at the dried-up grass. Cheers and giggles rang out from a distance, but she tuned them out, not bothering to even glance at the children goofing off in the distance. She drew her legs in, dropping her chin on her legging-clad knees, and crimson eyes stared ahead into the distance. A bunch of wilting begonias in her view. The wind blew once more, teasing through the stray dark orange locks, falling over her eyes, and Aanne pressed her forehead against her knees. You lied to us. Her father's sharp voice echoed in her mind. Fingers dug into the blue fabric of her school uniform, tongue trapped between her teeth. I didn't mean to lie to you, Papa. I hate liars, Aanne. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry isn't going to bring my trust back. Her reverie was broken when her ears picked up the sound of someone stepping before her, her muscles tensing as she tightened her arms around her knees. The person shifted a bit awkwardly on their feet, then inched closer. A familiar voice piped up hesitantly. Are you okay, Ayakin? Go away, Izuku. But it's your first day in school, and you haven't even talked to anyone yet, Izuku exclaimed worriedly. How are you going to make friends like that? The orange-haired girl groaned into her knees. I don't want to be friends with anyone. There was a slight pause, then a half-hearted laugh hit her ears. So, I guess, you don't want to be friends with a quirkless Deku like me anymore too, huh? Something sour spread in Aanne's chest, aching and burning because of his words, and she lifted her head, eyes moving upwards and her heart clenched within her chest because of the look of dejection etched on Izuku's face as he stared down at the ground. Though a loud eep left his mouth when a body collided into his, sending him tumbling on the ground, and he blinked repeatedly in surprise, propping up on his elbows. Big, round watery eyes greeted him as Aanne sniffed noisily, clutching onto his sweater like a lifeline. Ayakin. You. She wiped at her runny nose with her sleeve, choking on a sob. You still want to be friends with me, even when I hurt you and your friend yesterday? Izuku blinked once more, forest green eyes softening as he tried sitting upright. But the girl still pushed him down with her weight, tears streaming down her cheeks profusely. I'm so sorry for hurting you and Kaken, Izuku. Please continue to be my friend. Hot tears continued spilling down her cheeks as she ducked her head, burying his face into his chest. Please don't hate me, Izuku. Please don't be scared of me. I don't hate you, Ayaken. Eyes brimming with tears peeked up at him, and Izuku let a friendly smile touch his lips as he finally managed to sit up straight. Aanne shifted backwards, hands falling into her lap as he offered a bright toothy smile grin, the corners of his eyes crinkling slightly. I'm happy you got your quirk. It's so cool. He cupped a hand around his mouth, a thoughtful look on his face as he mused aloud. Even if it's a little scary too, I guess. Aanne dug the heels of her palms against her eyes, rubbing away the tears. So you're not mad at me, right? I'm so sorry for leaving you alone. Not at all, he beamed happily, but then rubbed the back of his head, messing up his already ruffled green curls as a soft smile tugged his lips. I mean, we're still friends, right? Despite looking like a mess of tears and snot, Aanne offered a tight smile as she nodded her head vigorously. Izuku let out a laugh, crossing his legs beneath himself before he leaned towards her, green eyes wide and round with curiosity. Think you can do that again? Aanne blinked. Do what again? You know, he made a clawing motion in the air. The way you attacked Kaka. Explosions crackled aloud, and pairs of red and green turned, gaze swiveling to land on the source, and her mouth instantly growing bitter. Aanne scowled when Katsuki stood proud, beating his surprisingly healed fist into his other palm, eyes gleaming wickedly as he tipped his head forward. Ruby red hues focused solely on her. Rematch. He positioned his feet apart, tight fists sizzling with smoke. Now. Her eyes hardening, Aanne pushed herself to her feet along with Izuku, whose gaze quickly found the blonde's uninjured arm. But, Kaken, how'd your arm heal up? Then again, I did hear Recovery Girl was taking rounds this month. Which would explain how your arm is fixed now, but doesn't Recovery Girl's quirk make people feel drowsy? It's also cold, so your explosions won't be that easy to make, which could really put strain on your arm's muscles. Shut the fuck up, Deku, Katsuki snapped furiously, making the shorter boy wince. Shut your goddamn muttering, you worthless piece of shit. A hand shot out, razor-sharp nails barely brushing against his cheek, but Katsuki reeled backwards instantly, his searing fist swinging ahead, but Aanne ducked beneath the burning explosion, then whirled around abruptly to clamp her canines down on his arm like before. But instead, there was an open palm halting in her vision, a whiff of caramel hitting her nostrils, and Katsuki's lips pulled back into a sneer as his quirk burst to life. Die. Fire suddenly crackled, sparks spitting out like multiple fireworks in her face, and Aanne was soaring backwards, sliding across the school's playground. Like I'd fucking fall for that again, Katsuki snarled, adrenaline pumping through his veins as children crowded around them, watching in awe and horror as Aanne hoisted herself on all fours, hair loose and falling down her shoulders. She spat out a blood-spattered tooth, nails scraping against grass as her eyes flashed in indignation and fury. An inhuman growl ripped out from her throat, and Katsuki grinned maliciously, explosions detonating across his palms. He was going to show her who was the real king around here. Bring it on, catface. Got it. Sunlight slipped through the leaves, filtering the dust particles in the air as the trees stood tall and crowded, their dense green leaves casting shadows across the ground. Creatures of the forest sang quietly, hidden somewhere in the foliage, while wild dandelions peeked out from the grass. Midst everything, feet shifted, fingers thumbing the cold metal of the rifle as inspecting emerald irises dipped downwards, then quickly sharpened. Why is it still alive? Aanne blinked, cradling the tiny white rabbit between her small palms. The soft furred animal moved its head swiftly, then relaxed when a hand patted the top of its head, offering comfort and warmth. Because, Aanne began as she rubbed her thumb down the rabbit's long ears, a messy drawing of green bunny ears flashing in her mind, and she cocked her head to the side, lips curving into a smile as the rabbit nuzzled her palm. I thought heroes didn't kill. Her father's eyes flickered momentarily, a soft sigh escaping his lips as he turned to face forward. That's not the hero you're going to be, Aya. His hands moved, gripping the rifle, and Aanne's gaze followed the movement of the muzzle as Fujimo studied the weapon's end against his shoulder, finger curling around the trigger. Mind the ears, Aanne. The loud shot echoed through the forest, birds screeching in fright as they took off to the sky in flocks, and Aanne's hold tightened on the squirming rabbit in her hand as her ears rang achingly. A bird fell from the tree before them, a clear hole ripped through its lifeless form, blood drying on golden feathers. Fear wafted off the rabbit within her hands, shaking and trembling, while her father began calmly, lazily glancing her way. 2 rules in this world, Aya. The scent of gunpowder lingered in the air for a moment as Fujimo swung the rifle across his shoulder, jade-green eyes darkening. Either you kill. His arms slid into a cross across his chest. Or get killed. She stared flatly as the stench of fresh blood and fear clouded the air around her, ears continuing to buzz because of the gunshot, and Fujimo inclined his head, his gaze dropping on the fidgeting creature in her grasp. Do it right this time. But I don't want to. The words came in her mind, but refused to roll off her tongue. Papa, she started, uneasiness slipping in her tone as she shuffled her bare feet against the fresh grass. Do I have to? You've already broken our trust, Aya. She flinched, eyes focused on the ground as her father continued quietly. Don't break our hopes too. Her breath hitched as she jerked her head upwards, crimson eyes crossing deep green as she took a step towards him. I promise I won't lie to you ever again. Promise. Fujimo's eyes flickered with faint amusement, and he shook his head. Promises are nothing but just words, Aya. The girl chewed down her bottom lip, peering upwards through her lashes as a hand fell on her head, patting affectionately, and she shifted her weight on her toes, trying to lean into the welcoming touch without releasing the rabbit jerking between her clenched hands. But the hands sadly withdrew, letting her roll back on the balls of her feet as Fujimo smiled wryly. Now actions, his gaze focused on the creature she was holding once more. They definitely do speak louder than words, don't they? Her shoulders slumped, and the girl sighed defeatedly, nodding her head once as she allowed her fingers to loosen. The rabbit stiffened instantly, shooting out from her cradling palms, and dashed into the nearby bushes. Aanne took a step backwards, letting out a breath as her eyelids slid shut, and she listened carefully to the afternoon air. The sound of small feet padding away rapidly on grass filled her ears, and crimson hues snapped open as she pushed at the ground, darting ahead before leaping over the bushes and disappearing into the forest. Fujimo slid a hand into his pocket, drawing out a silver-lined pocket watch. An old tune on his lips, he glanced at the ticking black needles, then stared into the darkness of the forest, noting how green vines dangled over the tall tree branches. Better do it fast, Aya. Ragged breaths left his lips as he darted down the corridor, red sneakers hitting the tiled floor below as thin arms pumped at his sides while he pushed ahead, running along the side of the silver lockers. Voices echoed around him, ignorant of his presence, and he craned his neck back to observe his surroundings, but gasped as a body slammed against his back, throwing him face flat on the floor. Someone shouted from afar, "No running in the corridors." "Sorry," Aanne shouted back, sitting on the back of a heavily breathing body. "It won't happen again." Nails scraped the creamy school tiles in an attempt to escape. Can you please get off?" I don't know." she hummed loudly, leaning back in the air a little as she pushed her palm down on the bright yellow backpack. Maybe I'll get off when you tell me what you're hiding, Izuku. Hiding? Izuku echoed, chin propped on the floor as he chuckled weakly. What on earth would I be hiding from you? You took off when I saw you outside the school gate. Is so? So? The orange-haired girl repeated, unamused as the boy wriggled underneath her. Since when do you start running when you see me? I didn't run, he answered quickly, then bit down his bottom lip. You just came in really early today, and I wasn't expecting, so I thought I'd. You what? Aanne drawled, brows raised as she waited for him to continue. A defeated sigh answered her, and Izuku pressed his forehead against the cool floor. Nothing. Can I please get up now? There was a small pause, then the heavy weight on his back shifted, and a hand dug into the back of his navy blue school shirt, Izuku blinking as he was hoisted up on his feet with one tug. Aanne turned to stand in front of him, watching as he dusted off his uniform, muttering words under his breath that were too fast to keep up with. He's still shorter than me. She was gradually displacing her weight on her other foot as mossy green eyes turned towards her, shining dimly with fake mirth, and Izuku seemed to sense her intentions, his brows scrunching together in panic as he reached outwards. I can wait. But she was already kicking at the ground, bolting further into the school building as he shouted for her to stop. She came to a screeching halt, orange ponytail whipping to the side as she stood before the classroom, raising her left foot and throwing the wooden door open. Startled eyes turned towards her as she sprinted in, eyes darting around in search for something, sudden adrenaline pumping in her veins while she hurriedly shuffled around her spooked classmates. Aanne stopped, eyes going flat slightly as she stared downwards, tipping her head to the side as she observed the sight before her. Words. Her mother had once smiled half-heartedly, digging out the wild weeds in the nursery. They hurt the heart more than you think. Useless. Pathetic. Quirkless loser. Crimson hues gazed down at the words written across the desk in bright red ink, all in capital letters, and a hand reached forward, fingertips grazing at the bold Deku that almost reached the wooden corners, signaling with an arrow that pointed towards a dead frog stabbed into the desk with a compass. Her mind mulled over the words again and again, noting them with a calm silence as she ingested everything slowly. Snickers and murmurs spread through the classroom, but the loud sound of red sneakers beating down on the tiled floor drowned them all out as Izuku clenched the doorframe, leaning his whole form while he panted breathlessly. Aanne grasped the edge of the desk, raising her head slowly when Izuku scrambled to her side, arms flailing wildly. Well, would you look at TH there? H here. Lem, clean it up. Who did this? She inquired quietly, exhaling and inhaling as fingers curled around the edge tighter. How long has this been going on? I can explain. About time you saw it. Izuku winced, swallowing as red eyes instantly drifted over his head and darkened on meeting the familiar face of an ash blonde who simply pushed his chair back, feet hitting the floor, and Bakugo stuffed his fists into the pockets of his pants, a lazy smirk curling his lips as he stood upright. TCH. Was wondering when you were going to notice. He cocked his head to the side, a look of utter boredom on his face. Shitty Deku here kept clearing it up. He's such a fucking coward. Kakin, please don't. Aanne's fingers dug into the hardwood, snapping off the desk's edge with ease. Izuku shrunk into himself, murmuring a string of intangible explanations when Bakugo snorted from across the room, a toothy grin tugging his lips as he raised brows. PSH, what? Is Deku's lil dog mad? The blonde's lackeys glanced his way, sweating a little as they inched away quietly while he continued his mocking, smoke already puffing out from his fists. Are you just gonna fucking stand there, or are you gonna do something, cat face? The words were still in his mouth when the desk was suddenly flying halfway across the room, nearing him with increasing speed, but he held his hands out. A bright golden explosion, erupting from his palms, and burnt wood and splinters blew in every direction. Children cried out as pitch-black smoke clouded around them all, blinding everything, and Bakugo waved a hand through the air, clearing away a dense smoke cloud as he smirked proudly. "Ha! That all your dog got, Deku?" A foot crashed into his face, sending him reeling backwards until his back hit the window, cracks webbing through the sleek glass, and thankfully not shattering as he slid back on the ground. His vision swimming just a little when Aanne planted her feet firmly on the floor as she stood near his desk, lips curling back to flash pink gums and sharp fangs. Bakugo staggered upwards, wiping the blood trickling down his nose as he flattened a palm against the cracked glass, his grin turning feral. "If you're really gonna fight me." An explosion denoted off his hand, the glass shattering behind him as his feet slid forward in a flash, making Aanne stiffen when he halted right beside her. His hand grabbed a fistful of orange locks, a surprised gasp escaping the girl's lips as Bakugo pivoted on his foot. "Then I'm gonna crush you like the fucking insect you are," he snarled, hurling her into the blackboard with an explosion. Aanne slammed face first, then fell to a heap on the ground, strands of burnt orange hair falling down her shoulders as she heaved, sucking in a breath of air before she sat upright. "It's easier to beat those weaker than you," she breathed out, stumbling onto her feet and turning to face the class. "Iaken." Izuku hurried towards her, but she cracked a grin, gaze crossing slanting blood-red eyes. "Let's see how you manage this then." Her fingers suddenly sharpened into talons, scratching across the blackboard, and a loud screech erupted through the classroom, making the children hiss in pain as they covered their ears, bending in themselves, and ruby-red eyes flickered as Bakugo cursed, hands clamping onto his ears. A body lunged forward, a loud oomph leaving the blonde's lips as a heavy weight hit him, Aanne tightening her arms around his midriff as both of them were sent tumbling into the desks and chairs. 20 minutes. Bile bubbled up to her throat, but she swallowed it back down, bloody fingers fisting into her summer blue shirt as her eyes remained focused on the lush green grass below. Emerald green eyes lingered over the blood caked around her mouth, and Fujimo clicked his pocket watch shut, looking unamused. "It took you 20 minutes to kill it, Aya." He frowned, running a hand through his black locks. "It should have taken you 10. Rabbits run pretty fast." Aanne sucked in her bottom lip, rubbing a hand across her watering eyes as she sniffed softly. "Sorry, Papa. I'll try harder next time." Her father nodded his head, bringing a hand up to his lips before he positioned his fingers inside his mouth, and then blew a loud whistle that echoed off into the forest. Aanne rubbed her ears, curiously gazing up at the man who simply clicked his pocket watch on again with an air of indifference. "You still can't turn off your hearing?" "I don't think so. I'm trying, but it's kinda hard." Fujimo raised a hand, and the orange-haired girl quickly clamped her mouth shut, hands falling limply at her sides. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "You just took down something weaker than you, right, Aya?" Red eyes widened slightly at the question, uneasiness twisting in her stomach, and Aanne silently gagged at the clumps of fur in her mouth, managing to nod her head slowly. "I guess it's easy to beat those weaker than you," Fujimo said coolly, his eyes flickering as he tipped his head forward. "Let's see how you manage this then." Aanne stared, her brows knitting together in confusion when the noise of bushes and leaves rustling hit her ears, and she whirled around, eyes growing round like marbles as a tall dog came barging out into view. Papa," she stammered as the black-furred dog growled and hissed, baring sharp teeth as a stream of saliva dripped down his chin. "It's a German shepherd trained to rip and tear its prey into shreds by our department." Fujimo mused aloud as the dog turned his eyes on them, a chill shooting down Aanne's spine as his eyes locked on her. "He's gonna be helping you train from now on, Aya." The golden police badge that hung from the shepherd's blue collar rattled violently as he pounced forward, tackling Aanne to the ground. Horror filled her eyes as she was greeted with the sight of a widely opened mouth, and she blindly grabbed a tree branch nearby and held it between the dog's canines as he pinned her to the ground with his weight. "Papa," she grit her teeth. Tears slipped down her cheeks as the dog thrashed around wildly, biting into the wood as saliva dripped down from his chin and onto her face. "Help me." Fujimo spared her a glance, an air of nonchalance around him as he casually adjusted the blue peaked cap on his head. "Time's ticking." "Aya." "Huh?" Fingers plucked at the red stain on the sleeve. "What's this?" Oh, nothing. Mom might have mixed my uniform with the other laundry on accident maybe. I dunno, Izuku-kun. This looks fresh like red ink to me." Nervous laughter answered her. "It's fine, Ayakin. Nothing to be concerned over. Hey, how's the training with your dad going?" Aanne clenched her jaw, pain shooting across her patched-up cheek because of the action as she walked along the sidewalk, raindrops drumming on the roof of her black umbrella while thunder roared in the dark sky above. Lightning cracked through the graying clouds, splitting the world into two for a second. And then again there was nothing but the sound of rain hitting the dark, glistening pavement she was walking on, wind howling in her ears. This was the third time this month she had ended up in a fight with Katsuki. Third time she saw Bakugo Mitsuki barging into the office before the woman and her son began a verbal fight in front of the principal. Third time when the principal sighed and scolded them both as she just sat there, watching the wall clock spin, the thin black needles slowly like always tick, tock, tick, tock. Natsumi was out of the city to buy new pesticides for the nursery, and Fujimo was busy with a case, so the principal held her back with a detention hour. And she had frowned as Mitsuki dragged Bakugo out of the office room, the boy spewing curses at her till the moment they were out of the door. Raindrops had just begun pattering the office's window steadily when the principal massaged his temples, motioning for her to leave. Liar. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her school bag, water splashing under her feet. "Izuku-kun, you liar." Dark clouds roared furiously, and she paused, a familiar face coming into her view when lightning struck the sky for a brief moment. Aanne blinked once, then twice as she turned slowly towards the side, gaze falling on a familiar head of dripping ash blonde locks, as blood-red eyes set her with a heated glare. Calloused fingers loosening around the umbrella handle, Aanne raised her brows. The fuck you staring at?" Bakugo snapped furiously, wet locks sticking to his forehead as he stood under the small shelter of a barber's shop, his school uniform soaked in rainwater. Aanne had always noticed how there were only two things that made Izuku's eyes sparkle like stars when he talked. His chest puffing up with pride as respect and admiration lit those pools of green with his hands motioning around wildly. First thing being All Might, and the second being Kakin. At first, she had been curious, watching the green-haired boy chant the name whenever they were doing something. Kakin is so good at this. If he were here, he would have done it amazingly. I can't wait for you to meet him. Maybe he'll let you be a part of his hero agency once you get your quirk. The references were always positive, spilling with so much regard and recognition that it made searing heat spiral in her chest and her teeth grind, sometimes a feeling her mother termed as jealousy. But the first meeting they had was filled with burnt pieces of wood and broken bones. "Just what does he see in you?" "Oi," Bakugo growled, a band-aid taped to his nose as he scowled deeply. "I told you to stop looking at me like that, you ugly zebra." A frown marred Aanne's face as she adjusted the umbrella on her left shoulder. "What are you doing here?" "Fuck off. Does your papa know you're here?" "Who cares about that old man?" he sneered, jamming his fists into the pockets of his drenched pants. "Him and that stupid ugly hag who's screaming at me all the goddamn time." Aanne had never thought herself as a sharp girl, and yet she deduced. "Did you run away from home?" Ruby red eyes flashed with indignation, narrowing as Bakugo waved a fist near his face. You wanna fucking go here, eh? Her gaze lingered over the swinging fist, a cheeky grin splitting Aanne's lips for a brief moment as she bounced her shoulders. Sure. Within seconds he was charging towards her, fist soaring in her direction, and she easily sidestepped, catching a look of surprise on his face as her hand shot out, palm gently shoving him in the small of his back, and he lost his balance, stumbling over the slippery pavement. Fingers caught the back of his collars, a slight choking sound leaving his throat as he stood leaning outwards on the road, the rain hitting him like tiny bullets. Oi, he hissed, literally hissed, jerking around to break free. Let me the fuck go. Aanne released him with a shrug. Rainwater splashed around as he fell into the road puddle, curses and threats spilling from his lips when he pushed himself on his knees. A vein on his forehead throbbing as soaked black sneakers stepped into his line of vision. An umbrella was held over his head, stopping the rain's merciless assault as Aanne looked at him with amusement, a sharp wind tugging her ponytail to the side. "Wanna come over to my place?" He had kept Izuku company before her after all. A hand shot out, slapping the umbrella out of her grasp and onto the road as Bakugo's lips pulled back into a snarl. "Don't you fucking dare look down on me." Aanne's left eye twitched, but she sighed through her nose, exasperated. "I'm not looking down on you, yeesh. Why are you like this? The hell would I ever want to go anywhere with a loser who's friends with that useless Deku?" The blonde answered snappily, watching with narrowed eyes as the girl skipped near her umbrella, quickly grasping the handle and pulling it over her head. Thrusting a hand through the wet orange strands, Aanne turned around, sounding all smug and nonchalant as she inspected the hairstyle posters pasted along the shop's window. "Fine. Bet you're just scared I'll try biting your arm off again anyway. 1, 2, 3, she mentally counted. "Anytime now." "Who? What the fuck did you just say?" A hand landed roughly on her shoulder, shoving her backwards, and she hid the coy smirk wanting to curl her lips as Bakugo pinned her with a frosty glare, eyes promising murder. "I'm not scared of you, you shitty zebra. Wow, aren't you creative? I'll break your goddamn jaw this time," he declared furiously, giving a push and began marching forward on the sidewalk, rain descending back on him with a vengeance. Aanne blinked behind him. Bakugo. Shut your trap. You're going the wrong way." Realization colored his eyes, and he halted, a scowl gracing his features when he heard Aanne snicker beside him. Letting out an angry huff, he turned on his heel, nails biting into his palm as he passed by her, trying not to punch the stupid smirk on her face. "TCH. I knew that." Thunder rumbled in the clouds, the rain soaking him to the bone as his feet moved ahead, the rain coming down from all sides, and he blinked, a low growl leaving his throat when the edge of a black umbrella inched over his head. Hands in his pockets, he craned his head back to shoot a cold look over his shoulder. "Quit doing that." Aanne regarded him with a calm look, her school bag drenched in rainwater and a few locks of wet orange hair plastered on her forehead. She held the umbrella higher, tipping the plastic covering more towards him as they walked down the street. "You're gonna die with a cold," she told him, the ends of her lips curling downwards when he pushed the umbrella away from him. "Not that I'll mind that happening." Bakugo huffed, scowl deepening when the umbrella was lingering over his head again. "I won't die that easy, dipshit." "Unfortunately," Aanne sighed wistfully, making him sneer, and then a thoughtful look crossed her face. "But Izuku will probably cry if you die, so I'll make sure that doesn't happen." Death threats on the tip of his tongue, Bakugo parted his lips when the girl behind him came to a sudden halt, and he stopped as well, watching as she shifted on her feet, nearing the glass door before them. "Natsume's garden." The words were painted in bright pink across the see-through glass. Different flowers doodled around the italic words as Aanne closed the umbrella, then proceeded to slide out a golden key from the side pocket of her soaked backpack. "We're here," she chirped, pushing the key in and then twisting the doorknob. He stood there, water trickling down his hair and dripping down his face as the glass door opened with a faint click. A soft chime ringing from inside as Aanne pushed the glass inwards, skipping inside the flower shop. Her fingers still clenching the doorknob, she pulled the door open further, peeking out at him with furrowed brows. "You gonna come in or what?" Bakugo stared flatly, contemplating the offer for a second, and then huffed arrogantly, striding inside the shop with slow and calculated steps. The door behind him fell back into place quietly, the bell above his head ringing once more, and Aanne shook her head, throwing water around everywhere as she swiftly walked ahead, heading towards a staircase. "Stay," she ordered, wanting to tell her that he was not some fucking dog. Bakugo paused, ruby red eyes observing his surroundings carefully. He gazed, a puddle of water forming around his feet. So this is what a flower shop looks like. Plants and flowers hung from the ceiling, sprouting from the pots lining the shelves on every wall, and then there was the scent of earth in the air. The same scent that came right before when rain would hit the soil, and he sniffed slightly, a strong whiff of fresh jasmines filling up his lungs. There was no one else in sight, no employee or her parents even. His eyes shifted towards the lit-up counter then, finding no one there but a line of daffodil pots set atop the dark, sleek marble. Though a glimpse of blue caught his attention, and his gaze focused on the blue police cap that sat on the counter, and the face of a man with cold, sharp green eyes, standing inside a hospital's hallway flashed in his mind. The fucker's name was Fujimo, if he remembered correctly. The principal's grim tone echoing in his ears as he informed the old hag about how the man was the city's police commissioner, and Katsuki's future as a hero could be on the line if he didn't restrain from having a brawl with the guy's daughter every goddamn month. Bakugo clicked his tongue, scowling, like he gave a fuck about that old bastard's job. "Come on up." His train of thoughts shattered when a shout came from the upper story of the shop, and he gave a side glance at the glass door behind him. Rain thronged on the glass, hitting in a steady rhythm, and the hot-headed blonde breathed out a cloud of white, then began walking further in the shop until he reached the staircase. His finger curled around the cold iron railing, the solid floating slabs of wood making no sound under his feet as he climbed upwards. The first thing his eyes landed on was the bright glow of the small golden flame, flickering within the confines of a marble hearth. His feet moved on their own, stopping near the hearth, and his quickly hands reached out, the heat warming his palms as he rubbed them together. Come on. Sweat began building on his skin, a grin tugging his lips as tiny sparks ignited off his palms, smoke wafting out. Something soft smacked into the back of his head, jerking him forward, and Bakugo quickly snatched at whatever it was, the scowl on his face being replaced by a look of confusion because of the fluffy blue towel he held in his hands. He turned, an annoyed look on his face as Aanne strolled nearer, rubbing a similar colored towel against her cheek. "You've made a mess," she grumbled, eyeing the trail of water he had brought along. She dropped her soaked schoolbag on the floor, then plopped down a little away from the fireplace. "I'll have to clean that up before Mama sees it." With that, she flipped the top of her bag open, spilling out all the notebooks, and she breathed out in relief because her books and notes were thankfully dry. She reached further into her bag, fishing out a mechanical pencil, and red eyes drew to the white bandages that peeked out from the cuffs of her dry orange hoodie. Feet shuffled before her, and Aanne paused briefly, her eyes trailing upwards with an almost apologetic smile. "Sorry. Give me a few secs to dry off, and I'll get you something to eat. I know you're training." Her posture stiffened slightly, and Bakugo rolled his shoulders, smoke swirling out from his hand that didn't hold the towel. "Your old man's helping, isn't he?" Crimson eyes gazed at him silently, and he raised his fist threateningly. "Listen up, cat-faced. No matter how much you train, you'll never ever surpass me. You fucking understand?" "I'm not trying to surpass you," Aanne cut him off with a frown. Bakugo clicked his tongue, eyes narrowing into slits. Like hell, I believe that you and Deku ain't fucking dreamin' about being heroes and shit. I don't want to be a hero. Silence descended on them, the golden flames crackling within the hearth, and Aanne chewed the insides of her cheeks, crossing her legs as she whipped through the pages of her math notebook. She felt the boy before her shift, then settled down in a crouch, but she could still feel the weight of his gaze. Do I look like a goddamn idiot to you? You really want me to answer that? She smiled innocently, peeking up at him through tufts of damp orange locks before shrugging. But yeah, I don't want to be a hero. It's just something that my parents want. His brows scrunched together. Bakugo inquired slowly. And you're okay with that? Sorry. You haven't reached the friendship level that unlocks that question yet. She beamed up at him, a satisfying smirk settling on her lips when Bakugo scowled in response. Balancing the pencil on her index finger, she twirled it around with her thumb. Besides, they're my family. I trust them to know what's best for me. You must be a bigger dumbass than Deku. Red eyes flared up in surprise, only to find Bakugo glaring at the crackling fire before his gaze settled back on her. If you're blindly trusting others to decide what's best for you. Aanne paused briefly, mulling over his words before brushing them aside, and cocked her head to the side instead. Why do you call him that? Deku. 'Cause he's fucking useless. I know, she interrupted, a frown marring her face before her eyebrows scrunched together. I mean, you guys used to be friends. How'd you feel if someone called you that? The blonde snorted. Like someone has the actual balls to call me that. Bakitsuki. He stared flatly, a grim look slowly creeping over his features. What the fuck did you just say? I got it. Aanne feigned a look of contemplation, snapping her fingers. We should call you Bakitsuki. You know, 'cause you're such an idiot and your actual name is Katsuki. Try saying that again. I fucking dare you. A pencil's tip was suddenly hovering before his eyes, Aanne holding the pencil straight as she grinned cheekily in the background, tapping the tip against his nose. Bah. Tap. Cat. Tap. Sue. Tap. Kai. Natsumi halted, her eyes growing wide as she stood halfway through the door when the sound of fierce explosions echoed all through the upper story of the house, and the sack of pesticide in her arms fell on the ground with a heavy thud. She darted ahead, her heels clacking against the wooden stairs. Aanne. Blood trickled down thin fingers, dripping down on lush green grass, and a hand carted through sweaty orange hair, fingers gently pressing against the scalp as a voice coaxed smoothly. Don't swallow. A deep growl answered in return, and the fingers tightened, jerking the head of orange locks forcibly. Don't you dare swallow it, Aya. Parched lips fell open, blood dribbling down her chin in streams and staining the grass in crimson. The hand brushed back auburn locks, fingers carting gently through them, and Aanne pressed a palm against her mouth, sitting on her knees and focused her gaze on her father's leather boots, hearing the old classical tune he always hummed when he was in a good mood. But the strong scent of blood was all around her, overwhelming her senses, and she spat on the ground again, desperately trying for the metallic taste in her mouth to disappear. The hunt for the rabbit was easier. One slash of her fingers, and the white fur was stained with scarlet. Of course, she wasn't expecting the rabbit to fight back. It was too small, too weak. But the dog, trained to hunt and kill, had put his strength into the fight. Survival of the fittest. Her mind offered quietly, followed by a strong rush of nausea, and Aanne instantly jerked forward, hands grabbing onto the grass blades and dirt as her stomach churned, the contents of her breakfast spilling out from her mouth. Hot tears gathered in her eyes, her eyelids squeezed shut as a hand pressed along her back, rubbing soothing circles, and the old, broken tune returned, humming softly and filling her heart with ease and comfort, and aiding her in ignoring the heat of the tears streaming down her cheeks. Emerald green eyes took the dead dog in one leisurely sweep, and Fujimo settled down, hand not wavering as he continued rubbing her back, the ends of his lips twitching upwards slightly. Now that's my little girl. Soft white locks framed his face, bright blue eyes shimmering with mirth as a grin tugged his lips upwards, breezy laughter drowning out in the enormous gymnasium as he stood amidst his friends, raising a toned arm to wipe the beads of sweat off his brow. A water bottle was tossed in the air, and he quickly caught it, all 5 fingers gently squeezing the plastic. Frost crept along the bottle's surface, his hand moving for the lid as he chatted amiably, decked in the school's navy blue basketball uniform. The friend at his right shuffled closer, murmuring something near his ear, and blue eyes flared up in surprise as he perked up, gaze swiveling to the far corner of the benches. Ocean blue clashed with crimson red, and Aanne tensed, snapping her gaze forward instantly. Warmth slid up her neck, heating her cheeks as her quickened pulse drummed in her ears. Don't tell me he caught me staring. She peeked back from the corner of her eyes, finding him engaged in conversation once more, and the girl released a sigh she wasn't aware she was holding back till now. This feeling. Aanne pressed a hand against her chest, palm flattening over her thrumming heart as she grimaced, face still warm. What is this? So if why you want to come too? Aanne blinked once, dropping her hands loosely in her lap, and turned her head to meet pools of curious deep greens staring at her. I'm sorry, she shook her head, ponytail swishing from side to side as an apologetic smile touched her lips. I didn't quite catch that, Izuku. Izuku shifted from beside the bench, smiling sheepishly as he swung his legs idly while his gaze fell on the floor. It's okay, Aanne. It was nothing important anyway. Her lips curving into a frown, Aanne clenched the curve of the bench as she sat up straighter. Izuku. A hand landed on his shoulder, making him lift his head, and Aanne met his gaze firmly, fingers squeezing gently. Nothing you say is unimportant, all right? Pink dusted across freckled cheeks when Izuku jerked in his spot, nodding vigorously as he wrung his hands together, stammering. Why yeah, so there's actually this small fan-made all-M-Might convention this weekend, and I thought maybe if you wanna. Hands clapped together loudly, all eyes turning towards the well-built woman standing near the benches. The gym instructor was a short, structured woman, standing tall and proud with her toned arms crossed across her chest as she huffed, glare focusing on her students. She cocked her head to the side, eyes changing from dark gray to a bright yellow. Izuku's fingers itched a little, mumbling something about the woman's quirk, but flinched when she shot him a frosty glare. Listen up, kiddies, she bellowed, hands set on her hips. We're gonna have a nice game of dodgeball here. Don't let me catch anyone using their quirks, understood? Yes, ma'am. She nodded approvingly, gaze shifting to her selected students. Now hurry up you two. Choose your teams. Aanne felt Izuku stiffen beside her, growing pale and her eyes sharpened when Bakugo stepped into their line of vision, cracking his knuckles as a feral grin curled his lips. His gaze found hers, and a frown marred her face as he planted his hands on hips, smirking cockily. Oi, catface. Get your ass here. Her fingers dug into the bench, cracks webbing through the wood as her lips pulled back into a snarl. I am not going to be on your team. You heard him, Shizu. The gym instructor interrupted, yellow irises shifting to a deep red. Get over there. Aanne clamped her mouth shut, cursing inwardly before casting an apologetic glance Izuku's way, the boy responding with a shaky smile. She pushed herself on her feet, stomping her way over to the ash blonde, the smirk firmly plastered on his face. One by one all the students were chosen, being called to their respective teams until the only person left was a curly green-haired boy. Aanne chewed the insides of her cheeks, her lips curling downwards as Izuku shuffled awkwardly on his feet, fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. "Aw, man." Izuku flinched, gaze fixed on his bright red sneakers. Why do we get the quirkless loser? Ruby red hues flashed with indignation, glare boring holes in the back of the speaker's head. Aanne shifted on her feet, scuffed up black sneakers squeaking against the polished floors as she caught a basketball being tossed at her. She felt Bakugo straighten by her side, muscles tense as he muttered with a pleased grin. I fucking love this game. The instructor chopped the air with a hand, blowing the silver whistle noisily. Despite the brief pain erupting in her sensitive ears, Aanne reeled her arm back, then flung the ball with full force. With a loud thwack, it slammed against the boy's head, knocking the wind out of him as he was thrown across the floor. She nodded satisfactorily, dodging a ball headed her way. That's what you get. She sidestepped and aimed for her head, lips curling into a lazy smile. When you talk shit about my friend. There was a storm of balls being thrown across the gymnasium, sounds of yelps and bodies hitting the floor resonating in her ears as Aanne focused solely on not getting hit with one of them. The thundering bellows of "Die, scums!" from the far side of the gym was enough to tell her that Bakugo was having a blast. But her ears picked on the sound of a faint explosion, the almost unnoticeable whiff of smoke following suit, and her muscles tensed, an alarm going off in her head when Bakugo snarled furiously, hurling a ball forward with smoke wafting off his blazing palm. Die, Deku! Her legs moved on their own, breaking into a sprint. Feet thumped down on the polished maple wood, heart thudding away in her chest, and Aanne clenched her jaw, the world around her slowing ever so slightly as a mess of green hair came into her view. Izuku turned around, a look of surprise on his face as she rushed towards him. Fingers hooked onto his shoulder, shoving him backwards before the storming basketball slammed into her right cheek, pain exploding across her face as Aanne was sent tumbling sideways. Orange ponytail whipped to the side, her body hitting the silver cart placed by the benches. Water bottles shuddered when the impact was made, then proceeded to topple over her as she lay beneath the onslaught. Aanne sucked in a sharp breath, curling inwards while the bottles rolled before her on the floor. Footsteps ushered towards her, the whole gymnasium springing back to life when hands grabbed her arm. You okay, kid? Red eyes cracked open, a shadow looming over her with a frown, and Aanne was sat down on her knees as the gym instructor pulled her up, the woman now standing on her feet and holding the young teen's shoulder. You need to go to the nurse, eh? I'm fine, Aanne shrugged off the hand, plopping down on her bottom as she raised a hand to touch her swelling cheek. She winced. Really, am fine. The woman before her looked unamused, eyes flashing like a twin set of rubies as two pairs of feet skidded near them, one of them seething while the other scrambled towards the orange-haired girl, nearly tripping over the bottles rolling around on the floor. Aanne, are you okay? Fucking what the actual fuck, Stripes? That was meant for fucking Deku. Bakugo, the woman deadpanned, the red in her eyes deepening somehow. What the hell did I say about using quirks? Bakugo huffed furiously, a slight crease in his brow as an ugly, purple bruise began appearing on Aanne's cheek. He grimaced, scowl deepening, while Izuku flailed his arms around, ushering to the girl's side. I can take you to the nurse's office. You fucking deaf, Deku? She said she doesn't want to go. Bakugo Katsuki. He gritted his teeth together, fixing their teacher with a frosty glare who simply pinched the bridge of her nose, sighing exasperatedly. Get back in the gym. Aanne watched quietly as the blonde parted his lips to retort, only to slam his lips shut and turned on his heel, shooting her a glare over his shoulder. Fucking dumbass. You. Izuku blinked, and their teacher shifted, stalking ahead as she made her way towards the others. Make sure your friend doesn't need anything. Aanne frowned at the woman's retreating back, stretching her legs out on the cool maple floor, and winced when Izuku whirled around, brows furrowed with deep concern as he bent into a bow, his hands hanging stiffly at his sides. This is all my fault. I tried my best not to get hit, and then Kaken used his quirk like that, and you took the hit for me. Izuku. I'm so sorry, Ayaken. I should have been more aware, and now you're hurt because of me. Please forgive me. Izuku. You always get in trouble because of me. And now you're in pain. Izuku. He paused, eyes peering upwards, and Aanne smiled weakly. Can you get me some ice, please? Her cheek was swollen, colored in an ugly bruise that made him bite his lip, and he nodded his head vigorously, straightening up. I'll get it for you. Just stay here, okay? Wouldn't move a muscle, she joked with a cheeky grin, watching him grimace before he rushed towards the double doors, worry coloring his features clearly. Pain continuing to bloom across her cheek. Her eyes dipped towards the numerous bottles scattered on the floor, and with a soft sigh, Aanne leaned down on her knees, orange ponytail slipping past her shoulder as she gathered the bottles in her arms. The water bottles felt cool against her skin, and for a moment she contemplated on using one as a makeshift ice pack to soothe her burning, discolored cheek. One bottle toppled out of her arms, making her curse as it bounced on the floor, rolling out of her reach. White trainers, lined with an aquamarine blue, stepped into her line of vision, the bottle coming to a halt, and copper-red eyes peered upwards, Aanne freezing in place when her traitorous stomach decided to do a swift series of somersaults. Bright blue eyes gazed back at her, a gentle smile tugging the corners of his lips as he crouched down, grasping the bottle in one hand before holding it out. You dropped this? The scent of cologne mixed with sweat lingered in the air, and Aanne blinked dumbly, suddenly realizing that she had been gawking with her mouth wide open. Fubuki-senpai, she clamped her hanging jaw shut, bowing down so deeply that the tip of her ponytail brushed against the floor. I'm sorry for troubling you. Hey, no need to lower your head. Fubuki smiled gently, waving a hand in the air. A thoughtful look crossed his face, and he tilted his head to the side. Shizu-san, right? Aanne stared owlishly, eyes widening with surprise. You know my name? Well, yeah, he laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. That's what the coach called you, right? Her heart fluttered in her chest, and she nodded her head with a small smile, sitting back down onto the floor. Deep blue eyes drifted over the bruise blooming on her cheek, making her whole form to stiffen up as he seated himself before her. Of all the times, and he sees me like this. That's a pretty nasty bruise, the snowy-haired boy mused, his brows creasing. You sure you're okay? Yeah, Aanne answered smoothly, offering a friendly smile as she waved a hand with an air of carelessness. I've been through worse, so it's all good. Here, a hand reached outwards, frost shimmering across the palm, and Aanne paused, arms tightening around the bottles as cold fingers brushed against her bruised skin. Fubuki smiled charmingly, hand curving along her cheek. This'll help. A hot blush exploded across her face, and Aanne nodded firmly, breath hitching in her chest while her eyelids slid shut. What the hell is going on with me? You're not supposed to use your quirk like this. I hope you won't tell on me, Fubuki smiled cheekily, earning a soft smile before he cocked his head to the side, a lock of silvery white brushing against his brow. Though that was pretty heroic, actually. Aanne cracked an eye open, perplexed. What? The way you saved your friend there, Fubuki answered thoughtfully, crossing his legs on the floor as he leaned his elbows on his knees. That was really heroic in my opinion. You want to be a hero too, huh? His hand gently pressed, Aanne flinching when her cheek throbbed achingly, and her mind reeled back to the scene of splattered blood across fresh green grass, the taste of copper on her tongue, while Fubuki continued, unfazed by her blank stare. I'm gonna be a hero too, you know? He grinned brightly, dimples popping up on both of his cheeks. I'll be applying to UUE once I graduate from here. You should try too, yeah? Maybe you'll become my junior, and we may end up partnering up in the future. Aanne hummed in acknowledgement, cocking her head out of his hold as she sat up straighter, ruby red hues flickering with mild amusement. Yeah, sounds nice. Fubuki offered her a tight smile in return, arms circling lazily around his knees. Do you skate? Yeah, why? Aanne gazed at him curiously, and he rubbed the back of his head, ruffling his snowy white locks, the smile still on his lips. Me and my friends are going to this new skating arena. They're opening for summer. I thought maybe you'd like to join too. He elaborated with a friendly smile, eyes sparkling like a set of sapphires, completely unaware of the butterflies suddenly swarming in her stomach and the warmth blossoming in her chest. Why do I feel like this? Aanne held her breath, managing a soft smile. Whenever he looks at me like that. Well? Fubuki inquired once more, flashing a perfect set of pearly whites as he smiled. You in, Shizu-san? Just say yes. A voice in the back of her mind whispered, and Aanne sucked in her bottom lip, stealing her emotions as she said firmly, I can't. A brief pause followed, Fubuki's eyes widening slightly in surprise before he nodded slowly, a curious look on his face. That's all right. I'm really sorry, Aanne apologizes quickly. I, kinda promised a friend that we'll go to the All Might convention, so. You like All Might? Fubuki interrupted with a look of amusement. Don't you think Endeavor is cooler? Iaken? The timid voice caught their attention, blue and red swiveling over to the source, and Izuku stood before them, holding an ice pack with his brows creased as he shuffled closer slowly. I got your ice pack. Blue eyes watched closely as Aanne beamed up at the boy, smiling widely with a thank you, and Izuku shifted on his feet as Fubuki helped himself upwards, giving him an inspecting look. Deku, right? He offered questionably, and Izuku looked surprised, mouth parting slightly. No, senpai. It's Midoriya Izuku. Aanne supplied firmly from her spot on the floor, lips curling downwards in disdain on hearing Bakugo's favorite nickname, and she gave a small smile. That's his name. Not that, okay? Fubuki mulled over her tone, nodding with a knowing smile before turning his head to face the green-haired boy. Sure thing. Sorry, Midoriya. Izuku answered with a smile of his own, gripping the ice pack with both hands when Fubuki shifted on his heel, throwing a side glance Aanne's way as he sauntered ahead with a breezy wave of his hand, a slight tease in his voice. Let me know if you change your mind, Aya-chan Tilda. The tips of her ears peeking red under orange locks. Aanne gazed at his retreating back in a mild mystified awe before she blinked, snapping herself out of her daze as an ice pack was held her way. Here, Izuku said quietly, watching with furrowed brows when the bottles in the girl's arm fell to the ground once more, Aanne wincing again before her shoulders slumped, and she reluctantly took the ice pack, freezing his hands. Thanks. He nodded absently, crouching down beside her, while she pressed the ice pack against her cheek, reaching for the bottles with a free hand, but stopped when Izuku shifted on his knees, collecting them one by one. I got this. Aanne compressed the ice pack along her cheek, eyes peering searchingly above wild green locks for a head of snowy white, when Izuku spoke up again. Fubuki-senpai is really cool. Her gaze dropped promptly, mossy greens meeting hers, and Izuku crossed his thin legs beneath himself, continuing to line up the bottles. His quirk is pretty flashy too, I've heard. It is, Aanne responded easily, a small smile turning her lips upwards as she giggled slightly. It's a really cool quirk. Iaken. MHM? Why didn't you say yes? A pause followed, the coach's whistle echoing in the gym briefly, while Aanne quirked a brow. You were listening? Izuku ignored the question, frowning as he drew his legs up, arms clasped around them. You're losing chances of making friends like this. Aanne stared at him flatly, remembering back to all the times she had been approached by her peers, From kindergarten to middle school, friendly smiles and gleeful grins inviting her with welcoming hands stretched out for her to grasp. But as she reached towards them, the same amiable faces were sneering and taunting at her very first friend, whom she had sworn to never leave alone once her quirk had manifested. Chances be damned, if someone couldn't respect the other just because they didn't have a quirk, they could go to hell for all she cared. Doesn't matter, Aanne shrugged her shoulders. Plus, I'm not sure if Papa will let me go anywhere on the weekend anyway. I've got training. Yeah, but though when you think about it, Aanne tapped her chin thoughtfully, glancing at the green-haired boy. My parents seem to have a soft spot for you for some reason. The image of a small boy with silky black locks and jade-green eyes with colorful bruises littering his pale arms flashed in her mind for a moment as Izuku's shoulders sunk in, a forlorn look crossing his face as he smiled ruefully at the wooden floor. It's not hard to see why. Guilt clenched her chest tightly, and Aanne internally kicked herself for bringing up his quirklessness as she scooted closer to him. So are other heroes gonna show up in that con too? Emerald eyes brightened instantly, excitement radiating off Izuku in waves as he perked up, a wide smile stretching his lips. Well, I heard new heroes are gonna be making their debut in it too. And they're gonna have the Dragoon hero, Wukyu, there as a special guest. Her quirk lets her turn into an actual big dragon, which is so cool. But I wonder if she can breathe fire like them too or fly. She should be able to do that, but I'm not so sure if she'll be interested in an interview. Deep red hues watched him mutter away rapidly, eyes shining like stars as he sat beside her, and Aanne felt her lips tugging upwards in amusement at his sudden change in demeanor. The girl reached forward with a hand, pinching a freckled cheek, and sniggered when Izuku winced, halting instantly before he grimaced, a soft blush dusting his cheeks as he frowned. I was doing it again, right? The muttering? Yeah, Aanne hummed, propping an arm to rest her chin atop her knuckles as a cheeky grin lit up her face. Don't worry though. You look cute when you do that. What? It's creepy, not CC cute. The locker fell shut with a soft click, the silver sleek surface showing a brief reflection of blood-slanted irises glancing at her as they passed by, rewinding her mind back to the events of yesterday morning. And Aanne dropped her scuffed-up black shoes on the wooden floor, sock-clad feet jamming into them as she turned swiftly. She tugged up the school bag lying on the shoe-changing room floor, throwing the strap over her shoulder as she hastily made her way towards the double doors. Hey, Bakatsuki! Blood-red eyes flashed with indignation, a snarl already pulling at his lips as Bakugo whirled around, halfway through the door when a fist was thrust into his face, knocking him out in the open. He landed on his behind, the lackeys at his sides blinking in utter surprise, while Aanne pushed past them, the doors swinging in and out behind her as she rolled her shoulders, already raising her fists. That's for trying to hit Izuku yesterday. Not my fucking fault. Aanne watched as the blonde stood up, smoke spiraling out of his hands as he cracked a ferocious grin. Deku's dog decided to butt in to save his sorry ass. Explosions denoted off his hands, and Aanne smirked cockily, the fingers of her hands curling inwards in a come at me, bro gesture. What was it again? Midoriya, right? Izuku fidgeted in his spot, peering over the taller boy's shoulder with his brows scrunched together as loud explosions boomed from below the school building, reminding him that Ayakin had left just a few moments ago, and that he really needed to get down there before her, or Kakin ended hurting each other again. Dude, hurry it up. Mossy green eyes turned upwards, watching as his senior raised a hand, waving at his awaiting friends. Just give me a sec, will you? Fubuki turned his gaze towards them, eyes trailing from the top of his unruly curly hair to the tip of his red sneakers. Izuku shuffled awkwardly under the stair, tugging at the yellow strap of his backpack, and Fubuki brought a hand up to rub the back of his neck. I'm going to be pretty straight here with you, Midoriya-kun. Fubuki began easily, his hand falling back into the pockets of his baggy pants. Do you like her? Izuku stared, the question taking a second to sink in before a hot blush exploded across his cheeks, his free arm reaching up in a miserable attempt to cover his heated face, while he clenched his notes tightly to his chest. And no, she's just a FF friend. Aquamarine Blues took him in one leisurely glance, and Fubuki inclined his head, smiling softly. Just a friend. Got it. The heat in his cheeks dying slightly, Izuku bobbed his head, while Fubuki leaned against the wall. But to be really honest with you, little dude, isn't she more like, I don't know. A thoughtful look on his face. Fubuki drew circles in the air with his finger, and then his eyes brightened. A babysitter. Izuku blinked, confused while Fubuki continued to smile, adjusting the dark red helmet on his head. When it comes to you, she's like a babysitter. Honestly, Midoriya-kun, think about it. Shizu-san is always following you around like a shadow and growling at anybody who ever ticks you off. Am I right? The older boy tipped his head to the side, amused. One day, she's going to get hurt so bad, and it'll be all your fault. Explosions erupted from far below where they stood, and Fubuki gave a lopsided grin. Don't you think that's selfish, though? Just 'cause you don't have a quirk doesn't mean you should be using her to fight on your behalf all the time, little dude. She isn't your dog, you know? Izuku's brows furrowed together, nimble fingers tightening around the strap clinging to his shoulder as he steeled his voice. I'm not using her. She's my friend. Denial, huh? Seems like she just pities you, really. Fubuki tipped his head forward, snowy white locks bouncing across his forehead because of the action as he sighed heavily. But if you really were her friend, you'd leave her alone, 'cause if this keeps up, you'll be ruining her chances of ever becoming a hero. You're wrong. The tightness in his chest was making it hard for him to speak, but Izuku idly gripped his hero analysis notebook tighter to his chest, firmly gazing up into the eyes of his senpai. Ayako doesn't want to be a hero. She doesn't pity me. She doesn't belittle me. And she'd let me know if she wanted to be left alone. Silence descended on them, Izuku's eyes widening in surprise when frost lingered across the taller boy's curling fingers, Fubuki's smile growing tight before he reached ahead casually. Izuku felt his heart pounding in his chest, a familiar wave of fear washing over him as aquamarine blues hardened into cold ice. Huh, Fubuki mused, eyes glinting menacingly as he lazily dragged his fingers over the edges of the hero analysis notebook clutched tightly in his arms. Maybe she just says that 'cause she doesn't want to hurt your quirkless feelings. Frost crept along the notebook, freezing the pages into solid ice. Maybe she actually wants some real friends, but can't 'cause your defenseless ass gets in the way. Every goddamn time. The frozen notebook tumbled out of his hands, fingers twitching because of the cold biting into his skin as it hit the floor, shattering into tiny pieces like fragile glass. Maybe you're the reason she doesn't want to be a hero. You're the one pulling her down. Fubuki swayed a hand in the air, nonchalantly, snowflakes winding around his palm as he scrutinized the green-haired boy. I really didn't want to play the part of the cliché bully here, but come on, little dude. If you don't back the fuck off, I'll have to freeze your sorry ass. Fear gripped Izuku's heart, hands curling into fists helplessly at his sides as Fubuki reached towards him, and his eyes screwed shut, waiting for bitter frost to seep into skin. A few seconds ticked by, his heart continued to thrum within his chest, and Izuku opened his eyes hesitantly, blinking dumbly when Fubuki began unknotting the school tie around his neck. There you go, Midoriya-kun. Fubuki smiled proudly, tying the tie into a perfect knot. That's how you tie it properly. For a second, Izuku felt perplexed, but then he noticed the way his senior's eyes peered thoughtfully over his head, and the organ in his chest swelled painfully as a familiar face fell into step by his side, crimson eyes glancing at the flawless made tie, and Aanne parted her lips, but ended up coughing loudly. Sorry, she thumped her chest, black soot coating her face and the edges of her cardigan scorched. I think I've got ash in my mouth. Ayakin, Izuku said worriedly, patting her back, and Aanne shook her head. The tips of her orange hair slightly singed at the ends as she waved her hand dismissively. I'm okay, just shit. His explosions are getting better. At least I got a solid hit on his stupid face. And my point proven, Fubuki murmured quietly, the ends of his lips curling upwards into a smirk, when Izuku flinched at his words while Aanne raised her head, giving him a curious look. What are you doing here, senpai? Oh, I was actually looking for you. He responded smoothly, shrugging his shoulders. I bumped into Midoriya-kun, and then I saw his tie and well, what kind of senpai I'd be if I let my junior walk around with a weird knot like that. Izuku stared flatly, hands curling when Fubuki spared him a friendly smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Right, little dude? Yeah, Izuku said quietly, relaxing his hands. Thank you, senpai. No problem, Fubuki grinned brightly, turning to face the orange-haired girl. And why is that every time I see you, you're all beat up? Aanne flushed slightly, rubbing the back of her head and flinching when her hand accidentally touched a newly found bruise as she offered with a nervous laugh. Bad timing. Fubuki sighed ruefully and reached for the helmet on his head, unclasping the straps securing his chin. You should be more careful. Aanne parted her lips to respond, but blinked in surprise when the red helmet was brought down on her head, and Fubuki smiled boyishly, patting the top of the helmet fondly. Try not to hit your head in the next fight with that spiky-haired dude, okay? Crimson eyes glanced upwards, meeting bright blue eyes and the soft curve of a smile. Stay safe, Shizu-chan. Oh, and you too, little dude. The black straps of the cherry-red helmet hung down loosely past her chin as she stared at the older boy who turned, making his way back with a casual wave of his hand. And green hues followed her line of sight carefully, Izuku sucking in his bottom lip as he glanced down at the melting pieces of ice at his feet. His gaze drifted sideways, an unfamiliar feeling begging to uncurl in his stomach because his eyes followed the burn marks tracing along pale forearms, disappearing beneath seared black sleeves. One day, she's going to get hurt so bad. His stomach twisted in uneasiness, hands clenching at his sides and nails biting into the skin of his palms. And it'll be all your fault. Just because I can't protect myself. His mind whispered quietly, making his heart clench painfully as he stared at the frozen remains of his notebook on the floor. What's up with that face? Izuku blinked, suddenly aware as Aanne moved to stand before him, the ice crunching beneath her feet and sending alarms blaring through his mind. Her eyes followed the sound of the noise, trying to locate the source, only to widen in surprise when Izuku flailed his arms vigorously. What face? He feigned confusion, laughing nervously as he pinched his own cheek. Was I muttering again? That face, Aanne said pointedly, Izuku blinking as she raised a finger between his eyes. It's the same face you made when Bakugo snatched your All Might doll back in the 3rd grade. What? No, hey. It wasn't a doll. It was a limited edition action figure. Yeah, but... Aanne gazed curiously at him. Why are you making that face? Did senpai say something? Actually, I was thinking about studying Fubuki-senpai's quirk. He blurted out instantly, and Aanne looked thoughtful, giving him a dissecting look as Izuku offered a tight smile, holding in his expressions rigidly, please don't see through me. Please don't see through me. Please don't see through me. Well, I'm sure he'll let you if you ask him, Aanne said after a pause, offering a smile. Izuku deflated internally, relief flooding through him. Yeah, I hope he will. Awesome, Aanne grinned, clasping the helmet straps in. Now I just gotta wash my face, otherwise my mom's gonna have a heart attack. Izuku shrugged up the bright yellow bag on his shoulders, falling in step with the girl as they began trudging down the empty hallway, red shoes appearing in his vision with each step as his mind raced back to the earlier conversation. Something sour pooling in his chest as he chewed his bottom lip, tugging back with his teeth. "You're the one pulling her down." The thump of their feet echoed off. His gaze focused on the ground when Aanne spoke up again, rubbing at her soot-dusted cheek. "Hey, Izuku, I just noticed something." Izuku felt himself almost trip, forcing a smile as he turned his head to look at her. "Please don't see through me." "Yeah? We're the same height now." The boy paused, blinking once, then twice as her words settled in, and his eyes took her in one sweep, mentally trying to calculate the height difference before Izuku pursed his lips. I think you're 2 inches still taller than me, Ayakin." "No, I'm not." A flicker passed through those vermilion red irises as she smiled widely, raising a hand that hovered near her own head before she lowered it near his. "You're just always looking down." Blood dribbled down slim, sharp fingers, soaking the lush green grass as legs stilled, foot digging against the man's neck, holding him in place against the ground as heavy, ragged breaths left his lips. The cut along his chest staining a bright scarlet across his tattered orange jumpsuit. "Help me." As I've said before, Fujimo breathed out a puff of smoke, cigarette set between his teeth as he leaned back on the tree's bark. "If he wants to learn, he'll have to come to me directly. Don't swallow it." Aanne spat, blood trickling past her lips as she raised a hand to wipe the wetness around her mouth. "I've told him that, but he says that you're—" She trailed off with a wince. Fujimo arched a fine brow. "I'm what?" The man on the ground swallowed thickly, Aanne feeling his Adam's apple bob under her bare foot, and she pressed in more, making him choke. His broken fingers lay motionless on the grass, tears slipping down to his ears as Aanne pursed her lips. "You're intimidating." Her father made a sound of acknowledgement, sharp green eyes flickering. "If Midoriya wants to learn something, he'll have to come to me himself." "Papa," Aanne frowned, ignoring how the man uselessly dragged his arms on the blood-splattered grass. "He's never going to ask you. Can't I just—" "No, Aya." She winced at the cold tone, chewing the sides of her cheeks and tasting metal since she couldn't argue because Papa was always right. "You will not teach him anything. Understood?" "Yes, Papa," she murmured softly, and her father pushed himself straight, inclining his head as he strolled closer. "This training I've scheduled for you is designed specifically to strengthen your quirk. Midoriya can't endure it." Aanne curled her fingers, then slackened them, shifting her foot back slightly. The man on the ground sucked in air through clenched teeth, shuddering beneath them, and Fujimo pulled the cigarette out from between his teeth. Sharp green irises glanced downwards, a faint smirk curling his lips. "So, what do we have today?" "You said," the man gasped for air, glassy eyes darting in every direction. "You said you'll let me go if you manage to kill her." Fujimo interjected calmly, flicking the cigarette on the ground and stomping his foot over it. "And yet she's here, alive. And you're on the ground, seconds away from death. What the fuck? You can't kill me, basta." A bare foot slammed into his chest, knocking the wind out of him, and Aanne regarded him with narrowed eyes. "Why don't you talk about his criminal record, Aya?" Fujimo mused curiously, strolling closer. "That'll help you, won't it?" Aanne racked her brain for the details her father had announced before, when the prisoner on the ground was grinning and cracking his knuckles behind Fujimo, muttering about freedom and fresh air. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and the scent of fresh blood curled around her, draining her senses as she traced the sharp canines in her mouth with a raspy tongue. "Name? Mamoru Yamero. Quirk, paralysis." Fujimo inclined his head, prodding her to continue, and Aanne lightly dug her heel against Mamoru's throat, his chokes falling on deaf ears. "Activates quirk by touching target, which renders them immobile for an hour." "And what do we do with people who require hands to use their quirk?" We break their fingers, she answered smoothly, and Mamoru whimpered beneath them. Committed 3 murders, 1 rape and 5 robberies. Sentenced to jail in Tokyo prison for 20 years. But do you think he deserves to live? Fujimo inquired, nudging Mamoru's crippled hand aside with the tip of his boot. After what's he done to so many people, and was even ready to kill another just for the sake of being free, should one really think that he deserves to live? Oi, who the fuck do you think are? His foot slamming down on mangled fingers, Fujimo continued casually. The hero who took him down brought him in without a single scratch. All the families that suffered because of him, and he gets out so easily. Quite unfair if you ask me. The setting sun casted soft orange streaks across the white clouds, the wind gently tugging at the leaves in the forest, and sharp jade green eyes pinned the girl with a pressing look. So what are we going to do now? Kill him, she answered quietly, pinning her foot against the fragile neck harder, while her father nodded his head. Yes, we kill him. 1 strike. Aanne contemplated, raising her leg in an axe kick. 1 strike on the neck. Her foot jerked down, bare heel slamming down into the ground beside the Mamoru's head, his eyes cracking open in surprise and fear, while Aanne bit down her bottom lip, biting down so hard that she could taste her own blood as Fujimo made a noise of disappointment in the back of his throat, gazing at the dent in the ground beneath her foot before he sighed heavily, a frown marring his face. I'm sorry, she muttered, lowering her head, and uneven orange bangs slipped out from the black hairband set atop her head, curtaining her eyes from the disdain look on her father's face. Fujimo sighed through his nose, sauntering closer as his hand slipped out a gun from the holster strapped around his waist, and he pointed the barrel downwards, Mamoru releasing a low whimper. His finger curved around the trigger and tugged it backwards. Pathetic. Does Midoriya want to be a hero? Cigarette smoke swirled upwards, the tip burning a bright hot red as piercing emeralds glanced sideways, settling on the young girl sitting beside him, staring blankly at her dried bloody fingers. Yes. Even if he's quirkless. Yes. Vivid green irises, a head of soft black locks, and colorful ugly bruises littering across pale arms blared stingingly behind his own eyes. But do you believe that he can be a hero, even without a quirk? A pause followed, the sudden silence falling on them being far too long for comfort, and he felt the ends of his lips quirk upwards into a wry smile. Have you told him that? No. You should tell him, Aya. Fujimo breathed out a puff of gray smoke, crushing the cigarette between calloused fingers as his gaze rose upwards, searching for something lost in the gentle pink sky. Before it's too late. Cold. It's so cold. Ice seemed to seep through his veins, gradually freezing his blood, and his back collided roughly against the wall, his feet stumbling backwards. Why am I so cold? Mossy green eyes turned upwards, thin fingers clutching the chest of his school shirt, trying to cling on any feeling of warmth, and icy ceruleans regarded him with an air of difference. Kaken's quirk left him in pain, heat scorching his skin and ash stinging his eyes. But this was so different. A thin sheet of ice crawling over him, slowly, silently like frozen water had cracked under his feet, and he was drowning with needles pricking him all over. Why? He asked himself, breath hitching. Why did I have to be different? This could all end pretty easy, little dude. Fubuki breathed out a rush of frosty air, snowflakes lingering in the atmosphere, while his friends hooted behind him. Didn't know you had it in you, Fu-kun. I'm a man of surprises. Still might want to hurry, dude. Don't want anyone catching us here after school. I will. Once this loser agrees to everything. Izuku coughed loudly, wheezing because his lungs hurt with each breath, being greedily sucked in as he curled into himself on the floor. Tears gathered in his eyes, quietly sliding down freckled cheeks while his teeth chattered, frost nipping at every inch of his skin as he tried to lift his head. Why do they all have to hate me? A foot sat on his head, shoving his back down. This will all end if you just fucking say that you'll leave her alone, you know? Tears blurred his vision, and Izuku blinked, staring down at the floor where his teardrops dropped downwards, freezing once they made contact, and he felt his heart clench tight in his chest. Bright scarlet eyes flickering with warmth and understanding flashing vividly in his mind. Pink lips curling into a soft smile and muttering words that would calm his frantic heart in the tender confines of the plant nursery. I'll never leave you alone. And no. Silence descended on them. Surprise lighting up on faces before the foot on his head stomped downwards, slamming Izuku's face against the floor. Fubuki looked down at him coolly. Care to repeat that, you quirkless dipshit? The foot ascended slightly, giving him some space to lift his head. Izuku shifting on his propped arms, lips turning a dull shade of blue, and he gritted his chattering teeth together. I said no. Why, you little? Aanne is my friend. The first person to accept me for who I am. Izuku said firmly, hands curling into fists against the cold floor as he coughed, eyes watering but filled with determination. No matter what you do, I'm not going to leave her side. Not unless she tells me that herself. Stone-cold eyes were gazing down at him silently, brimming with loath and disdain while he sat back down on the floor, his lungs burning like they had been frozen over and his eyes glinted brightly for a moment, forest green hues shining with fierceness as he offered a crooked grin. So do your worst. Fubuki scowled deeply, hoarfrost steadily climbing up to his elbows as he swung his leg back, and Izuku felt his eyelids slide shut as he waited for the kick to make impact. How can you protect anyone? His traitorous mind whispered softly, tauntingly as hot tears pricked his eyes. You can't even protect yourself. Surprised cries and startled gasps hit his ears, a familiar presence kneeling beside him, forcing his eyes open, and Izuku bent inwards, grinding his teeth as he clutched his chest, tears streaming down his cheeks and dripping down his chin as he inhaled abruptly. Icy air rushed into his lungs, tears pricking his eyes when he coughed violently, forehead digging against the tiled floor. Cold. He shivered, trembling against the tiles as he curled into a fetal position, ragged breaths escaping his lips in clouds of white fog, while a shadow moved over him, hands gently running down his back as he squeezed his eyes shut. It's so cold. What did you do to him? Fubuki blinked, the dwindling afternoon light slipping in through the long slanted windows of the school hallway as he lay there on his stomach, the sound of his peers groaning faintly in the background filling his ears when he tried to sit upright, only to be shoved back against the pale tiles. The weight on his back shifted, pushing him flat against the floor when he attempted to move his arms that were being pinned down behind him. Realization colored his eyes when pain bloomed across his face, drops of blood trickling down his nose and onto the floor beneath them. Shizu-san? What did you do to him? Aanne repeated calmly, fingers tightening almost painfully around his pinned wrists. What the hell did you do to Izuku? Fubuki tried breaking his arms free. I just gave him a little frostbite. You did what? He flinched at her sharp tone, wriggling under her. I can actually explain, damn. Can you get off? You used your quirk on him. There were fingers digging into his head, grabbing a fistful of snowy white locks, and he heard her voice break slightly as she spoke miserably. Why would you do that to him? Look, Fubuki frowned. If you just get off. I thought you liked me. I do. That's why I want him to get away from you, since he keeps treating you like his very own dog. The fingers in his hair stiffened, and he craned his head back, freezing when a pair of cold, hard red irises gazed back at him, flickering with contempt and hatred as they stared viciously. But he masked the feeling of dread pooling in his chest with a warm smile, the ends of his lips tugging upwards as his eyes softened. Come on now, don't look at me like that. Papa's right, Aanne said serenely, and Fubuki halted, eyes widening in surprise when her fingers dug into his hair, forcibly tugging his head backwards. Fear rushed off him in waves, hitting her like tides and flooding her senses as her heart quietly reveled in the feeling of despair and disquiet. Hey, what are you? She jerked his head forward instantly, slamming his face against the tiles. People like you. Slam. Don't deserve. Slam. To be heroes. Slam. Her arm moved repeatedly, pummeling his face over and over again until blood smeared on the floor, staining the pale tiles with a bright, brilliant red, and then it came to a halt, stopping midway before the hold of her fingers slackened in sweaty white hair, his face dropping back into the pool of blood with a soft thud. Pathetic. Steam drifted upwards, fingers cradling the cup between his palms as he basked in the warmth of the room, bundled up in several blankets with tufts of curly green hair popping out from under a bright red beanie. Izuku clutched the cup of flower tea tighter, bringing the rim to his lips and blowing at the clouds of steam hovering above. I'm pretty sure you're supposed to drink it hot. Soft mossy greens peered sideways, a small smile touching his face, and Izuku dipped his head in a slight nod, sipping the tea gingerly. Thank you for the tea, Ayakin. You should thank my mom for that. Aanne answered, tucking her legs under herself on the chair near his bedside. Though your mom looks pretty tired. She is, Izuku responded quietly, voice cornering guilt as he stared down at his cup, gazing down at the dark pink petals wrapped into a small bulb floating amidst the hot water. I mean, having your son nearly turn into a human popsicle isn't really assuring. His mild attempt at humor failed to result in any sort of laughter, and he felt himself shrink under the pressing stare of the girl, making him sink more into the fluffy blankets his mother had given him an hour ago, and his eyes drifted around his room, All Might's bright, wide smile gazing back at him, and his stomach twisted in uneasiness. Can't protect yourself. Izuku-kun. Aanne began gently, focused on him as she sat straight, analyzing the way his eyes darted around, averting her gaze, and she relaxed her jaw. Why didn't you tell me? His hold went taut around the teacup, burning his fingers, but he remained eerily silent, content in staring down into the swirls of steam rising from the hot beverage in his cup. He started meekly, feeling tears swarm in his eyes once more with his voice so weak. I didn't want you to get involved. Get involved? Aanne echoed, grinding her teeth together. Are you even listening to yourself? You could have died. You're always getting hurt because of me, Izuku whispered finally, blinking his eyes and tears dribbled down his chin, dripping down and soaking the wall of blankets wrapped around him. I'm the reason you don't have any friends. I'm the reason you don't want to be a hero. I'm so sorry. What are you talking about? Why? Aanne gripped the arm of the chair, brows furrowing. Why what? Why do you help me? He inquired finally, teary eyes pinning her down with a questioning look. Why do you stick with a quirkless Deku like me? Crimson eyes went round like moons, surprised and startled while he sniffled, furiously rubbing at his eyes. You fight Kakin for me. You fight with anyone who talks down to me. You liked Senpai, and you still refused him. Just because of me. Why? Aren't you scared that I'll ruin your parents' dream of you becoming a hero? That I'll just pull you down along with myself? Silence befilled them, Izuku digging the heel of his palm against his eye as he whimpered. Just why? Aanne stared long and hard at the weeping mess before her, eyes still, and the gears in her head turned slowly, mind and heart murmuring and repeating the same word. Why? 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 Why do I protect you? There's a picture of a small boy in her mind for a moment, sad green eyes that are nothing like Izuku's because her friend's eyes are the brightest shade of emeralds she has ever seen. The picture flipped away like pages, each turn showing scars and bruises peeking from below sleeves and collars. The green of the boy's eyes getting sharper, and sharper, pooling with anger, hate, contempt, and so much coldness, until that's the only emotion that reside in them. Aanne froze. Her heart sank in her chest, the air in the room growing warmer, while the sunlight slipping in between the drawn heavy blue curtains became brighter, clearer as she stared into empty space. A slight crease in her brow as the answer finally settled in. A suddenly vivid epiphany as a moment of shining clarity dawned on her, holding on to her in an iron grip. It pierced straight through her heart. Breath stuck in her lungs, and her hold loosened along the arms of the chair. "You're so selfish." Izuku sat hunched over on the bed, frowning down miserably at the lukewarm tea in his hands, and blinked when something lightly thumped against his head. Forest green eyes shot upwards, startled on meeting the end of a notebook. "Because you're my friend," Aanne answered solemnly, dropping the notebook in his lap. Hero analysis for the future #13 was written across it in bold and capital letters, his gaze quickly tracing the tiny cartoon doodle of a butterfly drawn near the edge of the notebook. "And friends protect each other no matter what." "I hate liars, Aanne." Her father's voice echoed abrasively, but she grimaced, shrugging her shoulders. "Heck, even if you turn into a villain, I'll never leave you alone. I'll just be one of your evil henchmen." His eyes flickered with a look that silently spoke that he didn't believe her, that he somehow knew that she was hiding the truth. But Aanne ignored his flat stare, a soft smile touching her face as her hand dropped atop his head, the red beanie flattening beneath her palm. "So please stop hiding things from me." "It's not like you don't hide things from me too." His murmur filled in her ears, and she tensed, staring as he raised his head, cheeks still flush from the cold when he beamed up at her. "No more secrets." "Good," Aanne responded casually, albeit a little stunned by his comment from before as she sat back down, the ends of her lips quirking upwards slightly. "We still going to that nerd con on the weekend, though?" "And nerd?" "It's an all-might fan convention, okay. Still sounds a lot like a nerd con, if you ask me." "Don't do this." Feet thumped loudly against the sidewalk. Skateboard kicked sideways as she bolted ahead, running blindly through the mess of bystanders. All eyes were turned upwards, mouths murmuring to each other hushed words of bewilderment and worry as they watched from below, unaware of the girl hastily threading between them as she knocked elbows and shoulders. Shouts of protest elicited around her, but she ignored them all because she had to run faster, faster, faster. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribcage, mind racing and feet thudding roughly along the pavement, pushing her forward with each leap as she darted closer. Voices tutted around her in disappointment, a few of them laced with worry and concern, with fingers rising to point towards the afternoon sky. She gritted her teeth and clenched her jaw in absolute anger and fury, for they all shared a mixed look of sympathy and fear. Though there was this look of amusement in their eyes that was enough to set her blood on fire. "Don't look at him like he's weak." Sneakers finally slammed down on the bridge, feet nearly skidding along the dark, glistening wrought iron. For a moment, she contemplated how removing her shoes would help her run faster. "There's no time." Aanne grimaced, jaw clenched as she pushed forward, slipping between the halted traffic on the bridge and towards the swarm of rescue helpers near the edge. Shouts resonated from speakers, making her ears ache, and far away from the sea of frozen people she was in, a head of jet-black hair entered her vision. Chills ran down her spine. No. Her heart raced. The air suddenly stuck in her lungs as sharp green eyes turned her way. "Stop. Stop. Stop." The man shuffled closer to the edge, his eyes darkening into a deep green while the air tugged at locks of black hair and pulled the edges of his blue uniform blazer. Aanne's eyes caught a glimpse of a peaked blue cat fluttering in the air as she stumbled forward. With each push and leap, her heart thudded rapidly in her chest, chorusing one line repeatedly. "Please don't do this." Several hours earlier. "I know you love me, but please try to understand that I don't want to do this. I mean, I'll still do it if you want me to. You trained me for this all my life." And Aanne bit her tongue, internally groaning as she leaned her elbows atop the counter, massaging her temples as she frowned. No, I shouldn't add that last part. That's gonna make them feel even worse. She sat upright, slapping her cheeks once and tugging on them to pull a serious face. Mama, Papa. Aanne rehearsed the same lines like she had been doing for the past hour, lacing her fingers together before her while imagining the faces of her parents in front of the marble counter. Please understand that I've never ever wanted to be a hero. So please don't make me give the UE entrance exam, or even any of the hero school exams. I just want to work hard alongside you both and earn this shop one day, okay? I know it's always been your lifelong dream to make me a hero. No, I shouldn't say that. Aanne sucked in her bottom lip, scowling and tugging hard at the orange braid slung over her shoulder in sheer frustration. I'm starting to sound like Izuku. A tired sigh escaped her lips, and she stretched her arms on the cool countertop, dropping her chin on the sleek marble. I still have 10 months. She pressed her forehead against the cold marble, arms curling around her head, and hands clasping down on her elbows. They'll understand. Bells tinkled faintly with the opening of a glass door, the soft chime echoing along the shop that had her ears perking up. Aanne propped her chin atop the countertop, lazily gazing past the freshly bloomed petunias and swirls of vines that drooped from the ceiling pots, only to find a head of snowy white. Shuddering breaths and quivering cold fingers flashed in her mind. Lips turning a light shade of blue and frost forming at the tips of wild green curls flickered to life behind her eyes, and her fingers curved tightly around the icy curb of marble. She continued gazing ahead, watching the head of white shift sideways to observe the stack of sunflowers looming in the corner of the room. Auburn red peeked out from his left side, and her tenacious grip around the marble curb slackened instantly, brows furrowing on catching the burnt patch of skin covering his left eye. Must have been an accident. Her gaze strayed upwards once more, marveling at the unusually equal split of red and white hair. Aanne stuck her thumb out in front of her, squeezing an eye shut. The boy wandered around searchingly in her mother's flower shop, but she focused on how her blurry thumb hid his right side from her view, displaying a different colored eye and fiery red hair. Her thumb shifted, now blocking the left half of his face to show ivory locks falling down a seemingly gray eye. It's like he's two different persons in one. Crimson eyes flickered towards the bundles of red and white camellias set aside on the tables, their colors brilliantly bright against the stark white sheets under them. Aanne idly swung her feet behind the counter, rolling her eyes on how sheer boredom had led her in discovering how her recent hobby was to associate strangers with flowers. Roses. Her feet halted in their back and forth swinging, blood-red irises shooting upwards in surprise, meeting mismatched eyes that regarded her with an air of calm and coolness. She briefly imagined how Fujimo would have been severely disappointed if he'd known how absent-minded his daughter was because she hadn't picked on the approaching footsteps. Aanne internally flinched at the image. What? She blinked dumbly, gaze quickly taking in the pristine school uniform of the early morning customer, the golden emblem on his blazer standing out amidst the dark blue. Private school. Do you have roses? He elaborated. Aanne raised her brows, looking unimpressed as she sat upright, chin dropping in her hand before she jabbed a finger at their right side, where ready-made bouquets of fresh red roses rested, the price tags labeled on them. Cobalt and silver followed the gesture, Aanne arching a brow when his hold seemingly tightened around the strap of his messenger bag, and he awarded her with another stoic look. White roses, he clarified. Aanne recalled the flowers in the nursery for a moment. Sorry, we're out. His lips pressed into a thin line, head dipping shortly in an understanding nod, and Aanne drummed her fingers along the marble, jerking her head towards the front tables of the shop. We've got a fresh collection of those, though. A melange of red and white camellias gazed back at them from the table. Aanne watched in mild interest as the boy shifted, seemingly contemplating on the offer before he nodded his head in agreement. Coming right up. She hopped off the stool, grabbing a box of plastic sheets, and made her way towards the flowers and ribbons muddled atop the table. Tugging off the measuring tape looped around her neck, Aanne measured the stems and ribbons with ease, ripping out an accurate piece of plastic before she snipped off the stems to make them smoother. Don't add the red ones. Her hand paused midway in reaching for the crimson camellias, Aanne shrugging her shoulders once, then resuming and wrapping the ribbons around the milky transparent sheet in an elegant pink bow that nearly matched the expert knot of her mother's. Still got a long way to go. Aanne fished out a pink glitter pen from her earth-stained apron, carelessly yanking the lid off with her teeth, her fingers smoothing out a small card on the table. Girlfriend's name? Silence answered her, and she internally winced, the pen lid sticking out from between her lips as she raised her head to offer a sheepish smile. Boyfriend's name. He stared blankly at her, thumbing the strap of his branded messenger bag. There for my mother. Right. Aanne responded awkwardly, tapping the pen's end against the table. What do you want me to write? That won't be necessary. Aanne gave her shoulders a bounce, holding out the bouquet with a flourish. That'll be 500 yen. His hand calmly slid into his pocket, pulling out a glistening blue card. Aanne glanced from the card to him, propping her hand on the table. We don't take credit cards. The boy nodded, shifting the bag on his shoulder atop the table before tugging the zipper down. Aanne watched as he fished through his bag, searching for a wallet or purse, and she impatiently tapped her foot, casting a glance to the old wall clock above the counter. Aanne! A feminine voice boomed from upstairs, and Aanne inhaled quietly, narrowing her eyes in irritation as the boy continued rummaging through his belongings. You know what? She rolled her eyes, taking the bouquet and thrusting it into his arms. I'm in a hurry right now, so you can just come in and pay later. Heterochromatic eyes settled on her, blinking slowly with that blank look persisting to stay on his face. Sorry. She dismissed him with a reluctant bow. Thank you for purchasing from Natsumi's garden. Aanne stood bowing, staring at the floor where branded white sneakers shuffled quietly before turning around. Feet trudged towards the exit, Aanne going upright once the bell tingled to signal the customer's departure. She sighed through her nose and glanced towards the ceiling. With one single tug, the apron was off, and she took towards the stairs, bounding up 3 steps with each sprint. She entered the living room of her home, eyes quickly catching sight of the people inside. Yes, Mama? Natsumi's eyes glittered brightly, lips tugged upwards in a gleeful smile as she sat on the carpeted floor. On the opposite side of the low wooden table, Fujimo remained quiet in his spot, eyes flickering with an emotion that Aanne had only seen him hold sometimes for Midoriya. Though sensing the strange excitement radiating off her parents in waves, Aanne slipped out of her slippers and patted her way towards them. Her mother patted the spot beside her affectionately. Aanne felt her heart swell up at the warmth in their gesture, an easy smile touching her face as she crouched down beside the woman. It came, Natsumi announced excitedly. Aanne blinked confusingly. What came? Natsumi glanced over her husband, eyes shining like stars, and Fujimo slid an envelope over the table. Aanne stared owlishly, reaching out and taking the crisp white envelope in her hands. The seal had been ripped open with a knife, the golden letters written at the back in bright, capital font as she took the letter out. A sinking feeling settled in the pit of her stomach. Her throat grew dry like sandpaper, and she chewed her bottom lip, going through each word carefully. The principal's flowery signature held a tiny black paw print at its end, but it did little to ease the way her heart had suddenly constricted into a tight knot. Congratulations. Your father managed to get Gen Ed from Yuyui. Tears sparkled in Natsumi's eyes, and she brushed them away with a bright smile. And now our daughter is going in as well. I've never felt so happy in my entire life. We are delighted to tell you. Yeah, Aanne swallowed thickly. Real happy. The exam is in 10 months. Fujimo finally spoke, lacing his fingers together and setting them on the table. We'll have to extend our training time. That you have been selected. Extended, Aanne echoed in surprise, brows knitting together in worry. But I'm already failing 2 classes in school. For the top 10. Doesn't matter. Natsumi waved her hand nonchalantly. Your father would deal with the written exam anyway. This is such a proud moment. Student recommendations. I need to talk to you. Natsumi paused because of the firmness in her voice, surprised stormy grays shifting, while Fujimo casted their daughter a wary look. Aanne gripped the letter tight in her hand, holding it to her chest while she squeezed her eyes shut. At Yui. Yes, Aya. Fujimo's admonitory tone was like the calm before the storm, meant to hush her silent and bow her head like the good daughter she ought to be. But Aanne inhaled sharply, pressing the crumpled letter along the table. There's something I wanted to say. Signed, Principal Netsu. The human heart is quite strange. With each second passing by, it develops expectations. Quietly, silently, unknowingly, the people around you give rise to expectations. They creep within your heart and take root deep within your chest. They start to grow, each root curling tight around your mind just so you can feel the searing pain when those expectations are not met. Third-year students, it's time to start thinking seriously about your future and what you want to do with your lives. Aanne dragged the pencil's tip across a page, doodling aimlessly over her notebook. The teacher continued on. Why bother? I know you all want to go on the hero track. Papers were tossed carelessly into the air, and the entire class erupted into agreed cheers. Laughs and cackles slammed achingly against her sensitive ears, and she dug the pencil's tip into the table's wood, the graphite snapping half in her grip. Aanne stared at the broken pencil, mind racing back to the conversation from the morning. Her mother's angry shouts, and her father's breezy gaze flashing across her mind. Did he really mean that? Yes. You've all got some pretty impressive quirks. No power usage in school, though. Get a hold of yourselves now. The teacher chided reluctantly. Hey, teach. Her stray thoughts halted in their tracks as her eyes snapped sideways. The blonde seated at her right desk smirked confidently, feet propped up on his desk and arms crossed behind his head. Bakugo tipped his chair back, smiling with an air of arrogance. Don't lump me in with these bunch of losers. I'm the real deal. But these guys will be lucky to wind up as sidekicks to some busted D-lister. The whole class retorted in unison, cries of insults and expletives rising in the classroom as the ash blonde laughed maliciously. I aced all those mock tests. I'm the only one at this school who has a shot of getting in. I'll end up more popular than All Might himself even, and be the richest hero of all time. Aanne leaned over her desk, watching in mere amusement as Bakugo hopped onto his desk, chest puffed out in pride. Yuyui's standards would be pretty questioning if they let someone like you in, she murmured, dropping her chin in her palm. Smoke spiraled out of Bakugo's hands, head snapping towards her. You got something to say, catface? That reminds me, the teacher continued casually, tapping the chalk on the blackboard in a failed attempt to quieten everyone down. A recommendation letter was sent for Shizu for the hero course at Yuyui recently. I didn't assume she was interested. Explosions rained down like an onslaught on her desk, the wood creaking and scorching under the impact as a hand dug into the front of Aanne's collar, hoisting her up roughly. Caramel and burnt wood entranced her nose in mere seconds, gaze coming across narrowed crimson eyes. Aanne grabbed onto the desk's edge, stopping herself from toppling over while the whole class fell into silence. What the fuck? Bakugo snarled in her face. What the literal fuck? How the fuck did you get a recommendation? Despite the bloodshot eyes pinning her with a heated glare, Aanne raised her brows, then blew out a puff of air onto the blonde's face. Bakugo blinked dumbly, still hoisting the orange-haired girl up by her collars, while Aanne cocked her head to the side, a taunting smirk settling on her face. "Fuck off, Bakugo." A vein throbbed on Bakugo's forehead, the knuckles of his right fist growing white as he threateningly raised it in the air. "I'm gonna rip that fucking tongue out of your damn mouth. Please let her go, Kakakin." All eyes flickered over to the meek voice, and Bakugo's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You wanna die too, you damn nerd?" Hands and feet trembling because of the pressing of so many gazes on him, Izuku sucked in a silent breath, his lips moving but no words actually able to come out of his frozen tongue. "Oh, yeah." The teacher regarded them all with a cool demeanor, leaning against the podium. "Midoriya, didn't you want to go to Yuyui too?" Izuku flinched in his seat as the entire class broke into a fit of laughter. With a harsh shove, Aanne stumbled back into her chair. Crimson eyes shifted, alarmed as Bakugo slammed crackling palms down on Izuku's desk, throwing him backwards and onto the floor. "Oi, Deku," Bakugo glowered, smoke puffing out of clenched fists. "You're even worse than the rest of these damned rejects, you quirkless shithead. You really think Yuyui would let someone with a quirkless ass like you in instead of me?" Izuku crawled backwards, back flattening against the wall as he waved his hands frantically. "You've got it all wrong, Kaken. I'm not trying to compete against you. You gotta believe me, please." The boy lowered his head, focusing his gaze on the floor. "It's just that I've always wanted to be a hero since I was little. I may not have a quirk, but I can still try my hardest, can't I?" "You'd never be able to hang with the best of the best," Bakugo snarled, baring his teeth. Izuku flinched, and the blonde grunted. "You'd die in the exams, you quirkless loser. This school's already crappy. Do you really want to embarrass it more by failing so hard? Not as much as you're gonna embarrass this school cause of that shitty, sewage-like personality of yours." Bakugo's gaze turned murderous, while Izuku jolted on the floor as Aanne stepped between them. The girl stood firmly, settling him and the whole class with a cold glare. Aanne set her hands on her hips, cocking her head to the side as she sneered. "You'll have pretty crappy standards if they let someone like you in." "Huh?" Bakugo grinned maniacally, a vein popping on his neck. "Says the bitch whose fucking daddy pulled in some goddamn strings to get her a recommendation." There was a hand gripping her sock-clad ankle, silently pleading for her to stop. But Aanne ignored Izuku's hold, her eyes shifting from Bakugo to all the individuals in the classroom. "Actually," she scrunched her nose in disgust, "each and every one in this stupid class is an embarrassment to this school." She held her arm out, pointing straight forward. "Especially you." The class looked confused for a second, their gazes following the motion of her finger, and freezing when they realized that she was pointing at their startled teacher. "Me?" the man croaked in sheer surprise. "How dare you?" "Yeah, you," Aanne snarled, once again ignoring how Izuku's hands were tightening around her ankle. She spread her arms wide, motioning towards the entirety of the class. "You're watching all of these pieces of trash bully Izuku, especially this shithead." Bakugo's eye twitched as Aanne jabbed her thumb in his direction. "I'll fucking kill you, catface." "And yet," Aanne continued on, completely ignoring Bakugo's death threats as she glared daggers at their sensei, "you just stand there and don't do anything about it. You're the real villain here. Shizu Aanne, control your language or else. Why don't you try controlling this class first, you good-for-nothing idiot?" The dwindling afternoon sunlight filtered through the air, fingers tapping aggressively across the table as vermilion-red irises watched the clock, the black needle ticking away with each passing second. Nails flitted along the wood once more, and Aanne dragged her feet back, impatiently waiting for the clock to strike 4, so she could get the hell out of there. If you really hate detention this much, then you should have kept your mouth in check. Aanne stopped, eyes reluctantly shifting to the teacher sitting under the clock. The man tutted, piling up test reports on his desk. You're barely passing classes, and yet you got a recommendation? Honestly, you're lucky your father has that job. Otherwise, you'd had never. The clock struck 4, and the man jumped in his seat, startled as Aanne hopped onto her feet, slinging her bag across her shoulder. Gotta go now. Bye, teach. Now, wait just a second, Missy. Her hand twisting onto the doorknob, Aanne rolled her eyes. I'm not gonna wait here even for another second. Your father called in earlier. A chill ran down her spine as she inched out the doorway. Aanne turned, fully attentive and alert as she crossed gazes with the teacher. The man gave her a pressing look from behind his desk. Shizu-san requested you meet him at the Musatafu's Eastern Bridge at 5. Aanne loosened her grip around the doorknob, nodding before clicking the door shut. The empty school hallway gazed back at her silently, and she pursed her lips, trudging forward. Papa wants to see me. She shrugged the school bag up her shoulders, walking down the hallway. But why? Ugh. Aanne shut her eyes, thrusting a hand through fiery orange locks. I hope it's not training. I wanted to spend some time with Izuku, and crimson hues flickered momentarily, and she paused for a second, then broke into a jog. Within seconds, she was running ahead, turning a sharp left to the stairs. One hand sliding into the pocket of her skirt, while she skipped down a flight of stairs, she fished out an old smartphone. A slender finger dragged across the cracked screen, feet slamming down on the first floor with a slight thump. Izuku, Aanne started, phone tucked between her ear and shoulder, when one hand held onto the railing as she threw herself down the next staircase. Want to go to this ramen shop down the street? Silence answered her, but she kept on sprinting ahead, skipping into the school shoe room. But we'll have to be quick. I gotta meet up with Papa soon too. Yeah. Aanne blinked, pausing midway and tugging on her sneakers because of the gloomy voice. I guess I'd like some ramen right now. Izuku, Aanne said, concerned. You okay? Yeah, I'm sorry for not waiting for you. Kaken threw my notebook in the water after class, so I had to get it. And then I got I'm kinda out of school now and… Izuku, Aanne cut his rambling short, sighing through her nose. Just tell me where you're now. Oh, the boy paused slightly, then answered. Well, I'm actually on the east side, near that old bakery. Didn't realize I automatically walked over here. Must be that habit of walking to the villain spots. A tired sigh escaped his lips, and Aanne furrowed her brows while he mumbled quietly. I need to stop doing this. Izuku, Aanne said firmly, phone pressed against her ear as she jogged out of the school building. Can you stay there? I'm gonna catch up in like 3 minutes, okay? A faint hum responded through the line, and Aanne hung up with a soft click. Smoke reached for the sky, the scent of ashes and burnt plastic mixing in the air as a crowd of people huddled together near the alleyway. Explosions and snaps echoed off the walls, shouts and yells reaching her ears as she neared the group of people standing at the entrance of the alleyway. They all seemed to be watching something with bated breaths, eyes wide and muscles tight in either excitement or fright. Aanne didn't care though. She watched how a frail, thin man was gripping the pole in a vice grip, shaking where he stood. Raising her brows, she inched near the crowd, then paused when her eyes caught sight of a bright yellow bag. Izuku? The green-haired boy almost jumped a feet in the air, whirling around to face her, and Aanne stared because those pools of bright green were brimming with so much fear and horror. The scent itself was so overwhelming. Ayakin. Izuku's voice came muffled from the hands wrapped around his mouth, his legs trembling as he spoke. Ayakin, Kaken. He's in there. Her brows knitting together in confusion, Aanne stepped closer. The sounds of loud, shattering explosions bouncing off the wall as crimson eyes wandered searchingly over the number of heads in the crowd to look straight inside the brightly lit alleyway. Aanne blinked, once, then twice as fire sizzled across the street inside, shops and cars ablaze like bright torches. Amidst the chaos were hesitant heroes, backing away from a monster that seemingly looked like an enormous stilled wave of sewage sludge. Blood-slanted irises peeked from within the slimy green liquid, hands and feet thrashing aimlessly, lighting up explosions through the alleyway. Fear encased everything, wafting out from all directions, and Aanne did her best not to breathe it in, the hands at her sides clutching into fists as loud, heavy footsteps appraised them all from behind. Mount Lady's feet came to a screeching halt behind them, her gigantic shadow looming across the alleyway and covering everything in darkness. The fire seemed to burn even more eagerly once the sun was blocked out, while Aanne managed to move her lips, tearing her gaze off Bakugo's miserably flailing form entrapped inside the sludge. "Izuku-kun," she breathed out softly, her hand reaching for the frozen boy's shoulder. "Izuku-kun, let's just leave." "We can't leave." Izuku stepped away from her, eyes wide in sheer horror. "We can't just leave Kaken like this. He'll die." "Like I care," Aanne snapped, reaching out once more. "I'm sure the heroes are gonna save him. Come on, it's not safe for you to stay here." But Kaken. Someone's going to save him eventually." Dark emerald eyes flickered with an unrecognizable emotion, feet shifting, and Aanne felt her heart plummeting to her chest when Izuku bolted through the crowd, pushing away the bystanders as he entered the burning alleyway. Running into danger. Running to save Bakugo. Running, and running. So far away from her. Izuku. His name tore past her lips, skateboard clattering on the pavement. Fear and anxiety gripped her heart as Aanne shot forward, the people around stumbling back in surprise as she set foot into the blazing alleyway. The pitch-black smoke and crumbling, burning wood filled her lungs in one breath, ponytail whipping back as she bolted ahead. "Come back. Come back." Her mind chanted, sharp crimson hues focused on the bright yellow backpack, so far away from her reach. "I can't let you die. Clouds of dense smoke curled in the air, Bakugo's furious cries hitting her ears, but large hands shot out. Aanne tensed when a strong, firm hand clamped down on her elbow, yanking her back in one forceful pull. Pro-hero Death Arms tightened his grip on the teenager's elbow, tugging her away from the chaos. "Get back here, kid. You're gonna die if..." Sharp teeth clamped down on his hand, biting down into the flesh, and the man loosened his grip in shock. Aanne spat out blood, tearing out of his hold as she pushed at her heel, dashing down the alleyway. She ignored the taste of copper on her tongue, sneakers slamming down on concrete as she neared the wave of disgusting sludge. "Izuku-kun," Aanne shrieked, coming to a screeching halt. "Get away from that thing." Izuku pawed at the slime in vain, a set of bloodshot eyes watching them from the mess of slime and sludge as she grabbed the back of Izuku's shirt. "We can't let Kaken die," he cried out, and Bakugo's eyes rolled into the back of his head. "Get the fuck off me." Aanne ground her teeth, fingers sharpening into talons as she tugged Izuku back. He staggered backwards, nearly falling onto her. "You brats," the sludge hollered, rising upwards into the air like a ferocious wave. "Time to finish you off." Mossy Green went wide with horror, Izuku choking when Aanne tugged him back by his collar as she moved to step before them, eyes darting around for any signs of flesh or skin. But all that met her searching gaze was greasy slime and thick liquid. Her eyelids squeezed shut, arms rising to shield from the impact with the flailing slimy appendage. Dust clouded the air, and Aanne blinked, perplexed when a large shadow loomed over them. The enormous figure before them moved, blue irises peeking down at them from dark scleres. Aanne found herself stilled as All Might grinded his teeth, holding the slimy appendage at bay. I really am pathetic. The man grinned mockingly, tearing his arm away. Aanne tensed as nimble fingers gripped the back of her shirt, Izuku peeking over her shoulder with eyes round like marbles. All Might? But the number one hero exhaled, startling the teens when his large hand clamped down on both of their arms in a vice grip. I told you the traits to be a great champion, but I see now I wasn't living up to my own ideal. Aanne gently tugged at her arm, trying to slip it out from the man's grasp. Pros are always risking their lives. That's the true test of a hero. Damn you, All Might, the sludge villain roared, rising into the air like a ferocious wave. Detroit smash. The strong impact had a whirlwind of air erupting between the alleyway, the pressure so much that her feet left the floor. Aanne gasped, feeling her arm loosen out from the man's hold as she was sent hurling backwards into the air. Shit. Her body sailed through the air, and she braced herself for a painful halt when arms curled around her midsection, tugging her down from the powerful hold of the strong winds like a lifeless doll. Don't try biting me again, girl. Death Arms barked near her ear, strengthening his hold as the tornado between the alleyway dissipated. Dark clouds covered the sun, the weather changing in seconds. The arms around Aanne withdrew, allowing her to slump down on her knees. Death Arms rolled his shoulders, patting his bloodied hand as he muttered, "Those are some damn strong teeth." Something cold dropped down on her nose, Aanne blinking dumbly before her gaze rose upwards, meeting the dark clouds concentrated in the sky. Rain showered down gently from above, while people murmured to one another excitedly. Wow, the force of the whirlwind changed the weather. Of course, he's the number one hero. Way to go, All Might. Aanne watched, breath stuck somewhere between her lungs as All Might coughed quietly, her gaze snapping towards the thin stream of blood dripping from his lips. You die if blood comes out of your mouth. Aya? That he wiped away quickly. The man set down the boys in his grasp, smiling apologetically her way, as if to say he didn't mean to have let her go. But her mind was too focused on how Izuku slipped down on the asphalt, inhaling and exhaling through his mouth with his eyes blown wide. Bakugo staggered on his own 2 feet, fingers twitching before he settled down on the street, as well with a deep frown marring his face. That was really reckless, you know. Izuku winced at the scold, biting down his lip as the heroes gathered around him, a look of annoyance clear on their faces. Yeah, kid, what the hell? Don't talk to him like that. Shocked eyes turned towards the orange-haired girl, Aanne scowling as she pushed past between them. She ignored the way blood dripped down Death Arm's hand, tainting the cement below in scarlet. Her hand clasped around Izuku's elbow, hoisting him up with one tug. None of that was his fault. Hey, Kamino Woods began disapprovingly, the ends of his lips curving downwards. Control that tone of yours. If you all weren't so useless, none of them would have been danger in the first place. Aanne seethed, tightening her grip around her friend's elbow. Don't put your blame on. She doesn't mean that, Izuku cut in quickly, swallowing when all gazes swiveled his way. He bent into a bow, green hair bobbing. Please forgive us. We shouldn't have interfered. One of the heroes sniffed, tipping the yellow helmet over his face as he huffed. That's more like it. Aanne frowned, shifting her gaze from Izuku's bowing pose to the blonde nearby. Bakugo narrowed his eyes at her, soot and dust covering his school uniform, while his lips twitched. He jerked his head to the side, an angry scowl etched across his face. Just don't pull a stunt like this ever again, Kamui Wood sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Now just get out of here, all right? Aanne shot him a heated glare, the ends of her lips pulling into a snarl, but she was interrupted with an urgent tug on her wrist. Izuku nodded frantically, taking back his dirtied backpack with a polite thank you. Again, sorry for causing you trouble. He ushered them out of the alleyway and onto the busy road of Mufasu. Aanne could have easily pulled her wrist out of his hand and stay there to verbally abuse those good-for-nothing heroes. She could have kept the frail boy rooted to the spot with a firm grip as well. And yet she kept her feet moving as they stepped onto the busy roads of Mifasu. That was close, Izuku sighed in relief once they were out of earshot. For a second there, I thought they were going to arrest us. What were you thinking? Forest green eyes shifted, meeting blood red, and Izuku bit the inside of his cheek. What are you talking about? His back slammed against the cold glass of the window of a toy shop, and Izuku winced as he was hoisted up by his collars. You know exactly what I'm talking about, Aanne hissed, glaring heatedly as her lips pulled back into a snarl. The hell were you thinking when you ran out like that? Nimble fingers settled over her tensed knuckles, and Izuku attempted to pry hands off his collar. Iaken, please put me down. Aanne grimaced, loosening her hold and letting the boy fall back onto his feet. Her hands dropped by her eyes, sharp eyes watching as Izuku tipped his head forward, tufts of green hair hiding his eyes, as he murmured softly. Despite her enhanced hearing, Aanne narrowed her eyes doubtfully. Care to speak louder, Izuku-kun? My body moved on its own. All right? Izuku chewed down his bottom lip, gaze still focused on the ground between them. His fingers tensed around the strap of his backpack. Kaken looked so helpless. He looked like. He lifted his head, tears brimming in those pools of emeralds as his hands curled into fists. Like he needed to be saved. And you thought you could save him? Aanne fired back, eyes flashing with anger. You thought running in like that would unleash some hidden quirk of yours, and you'd end up saving the day like a goddamn hero. And no, I never. Izuku flinched as a hand shot out, his fingers unfurling when it slammed against the wall behind him. The cement cracked, denting inwards, and his gaze shot up, surprised and frightened when Aanne snarled in his face, the ends of her lips pulling back to flash sharp fangs and pink gums. You could have died out there. Izuku's lip quivered. Why, yeah, but All Might saved us. You can't be a hero, Izuku-kun. Oh. Hearing those words again shouldn't have been this painful. All Might had said it. His mom had said it. Kaken had said it. Everyone had said it flatly to his face. But those four little words seemed to sting more when they were said now. Maybe it was because he never heard her say them. He'd seen the look in her eyes, sometimes though, when he was babbling about heroes or writing fluidly into his notebook. The way those crimson eyes looked over him. Those slim pink lips curving in a supposed supportive smile, but not quite reaching her eyes. But those words never slipped out when they were together. It encouraged him that maybe, just maybe Iaken believed. That perhaps she held some faith for him. One day he could stand on the same pedestal as her and Kaken. And even when he had been mentally prepared for those four little heart-wrenching words, they still struck too painfully than he'd initially imagined. Tears were blinding his vision, so he simply blinked his eyes, staring down at his bright red shoes and watching how a few wet drops landed near them. I'm sorry, he mumbled softly. Aanne sighed loudly through her nose, and he sunk his teeth into his bottom lip, gaze focused downwards. A hand touched the side of his face, tracing the wet pathway of tears when he jerked his head, slipping away from Aanne's grasp. He shrugged up his backpack, wiping his face with his sleeve before he lifted his head, offering a weak smile. You're running late, you know? Aanne frowned momentarily, then unhooked the skateboard attached to the side of her school bag. The wheels hit the pavement with a loud clack, All Might's signature colors fading across the worn-out wood, reminding Izuku that she was still using his birthday gift when Aanne stepped atop the skateboard. Her eyes found his. Her gaze softened up like it usually was when she was consoling him after a mean fight with Kaken. Izuku tried his best to put away the sourness in his chest. You gonna be okay? She asked, sounding concerned. His heart twisted painfully. Yeah, I'll be fine. She smiled earnestly, nodding her head and kicking the cement below. His fingers loosened around the straps once she was moving far away from him, getting lost in the crowd of people below. Forest green eyes turned towards the faintly lit sun, spreading mild golden light across the pinkish clouds. And he quietly wondered why those 4 words hurt more than they usually did. Stop. 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 She had never ran this fast. Even when her quirk had manifested, and she had practically run a mile to the mid-areas, this time could never match any other. Because this time, her heart was promising to burst out of her chest. This time, she felt like she was too slow. This time she saw that the person was far beyond her reach. She couldn't save them, couldn't make it in time, couldn't be a damn hero. Please, please. Her mind chanted over and over again like a mantra, senses going wild. Someone please save him. Where was a hero now? The events in the morning flashed alarmingly in her mind, reeling back to angry words hissed out in the calmness of her living room. Natsumi so angry, her face burning red, and Fujimo so calm and collected, looking at his daughter with this strange, queer flicker in his sharp emerald eyes. Aanne felt her breath hitch, time slowing down as those same eyes turned her way, calm and easy just like the time from morning. Papa. Her father leaned back into the empty air, feet leaving the edge of the iron-wrought bridge, and for the second time that day Aanne found her heart plummeting to her stomach. Aanne lunged forward, torso going over the edge for a split second. But hands shot out, grabbing her school uniform and tugging her back, while she screamed and trashed, rescue workers attempting to hush her flailing form down. She wished for All Might to swoop in again like before, save her father from death like he had saved their lives before in that burning alleyway. But this time there were no heroes, no capes, no masks. There was just chaos and death, and people too far away from her reach to save. Thwack. The memory of her first time in a hospital played in Aanne's mind shudder by shudder. She remembered the stench of phenyl in the air. Stainless white tiles. Carmine red irises glaring challengingly at her. Mistuki Bakugo shouting. Her mother's own frown. The disappointment in her father's eyes as he looked down on her. The sting of that slap on her cheek. The burn of those calloused fingers. The heat of those hot tears spilling down her face as she was roughly grabbed by the elbow and yanked ahead forcefully. Did you lie to me, Aya? I'm sorry. She wanted to say that. To apologize while she wept, latching onto her father's leg as she cried her heart out. I'm so sorry. But she had swallowed those words right in and clenched her teeth when she was pulled away, Katsuki's eyes hot on her back. Tears blurred her vision as she stumbled in Fujimo's tenacious grip. Not a single word leaving her lips as her cheek throbbed in sheer pain. The only person I wanted to apologize to, Aanne had thought, wiping her runny nose, was Izuku. You ungrateful brat. The sharp slap of her mother's hand brought her back to the present, a curtain of orange locks falling over her face as her mother brought her fists down atop the teen's head. Compared to Fujimo, Natsumi's hands weren't hard or rough. But the way she was shrieking and screaming was enough to hold Aanne's heart in a painful grip. Look what you did, Natsumi cried, thumping her fists down her daughter's stilled form. Look what you did to Fujimo. Madam, one of the nurses stepped in worriedly. Madam, it's not advised to be this violent around the patient. Shut up, Natsumi hissed, smacking the outstretched hand away from her shoulder. Her gray eyes ablaze, she sneered. Don't teach me how to deal with my daughter. A series of consecutive beeps continued to fill the air, Aanne's gaze following the way her father's chest rose and fell with small, shallow breaths. The breather clamped around his mouth, bandages covering his limbs, and so many wires hooked around him made him look so small as he lay silent on the stark white bed. Fujimo was a man with an aura that demanded respect and acknowledgement. Being quirkless hadn't stopped him from getting that. It hadn't stopped him from engraving fear deep into his daughter's heart. Internal bleeding. Broken bones. The doctor's word had rung in the air, as he flipped through a notebook. The patient fell from a great height. Chances of survival aren't high. Fingers grabbed onto auburn locks, tugging forcefully. Aanne winced as Natsumi gripped her head, yanking at her hair while the woman shrieked in hysterics. We raised you, fed you, protected you, and this is how you pay us, Aanne. You brought your own father to the brink of suicide. I didn't mean to. Aanne sucked in a deep breath, frozen to the spot. Her arms remained still at her sides, not bothering to defend against her mother's furious onslaught. I didn't know my refusal would make you take your own life. Stupid girl, Natsumi sobbed, shaking the fist full of orange locks. You stupid, ungrateful girl. I'm sorry. Aanne sank to her knees, the fingers tugging her hair slowly loosening. Warm tears slid down her face, dribbling down her chin as Aanne dipped her head, orange locks tumbling down her shoulder. I'm so sorry. You should be. The painful grip of fingers in her hair left, and Aanne bowed so deeply that her forehead pressed against the cold hospital tiles. She clenched her fists, hair splayed across the pale floor. I am so sorry, Mama. A hard sole of a foot slammed down on her head, pinning her face harder against the floor. Aanne squeezed her eyes shut, whimpering as Natsumi dug her foot firmly down the girl's head. Would you object against your parents' wishes again? No, Aanne murmured. The foot atop her head pinned her face down harder. Natsumi's cold voice fell upon her ears. Speak louder. Aanne gathered her voice. No, I won't. Will you give the UE entrance exam? Yes, another forceful press. Louder, Aanne. Yes, I will. Will you become a hero? Aanne breathed against the floor, tear-wet cheeks clinging to her unkempt ruly hair as her knuckles turned white. The voice above her head spoke once more, cold and demanding, followed by the jab of the weight above her head. I'm waiting, Aanne. Yes. A glass door pushed open, a faint jingle resonating through the shop. Crimson eyes watched lazily, widening slightly when a head of dark green locks bobbed into view. Though Aanne's shoulders drooped when she recognized the person, and she folded her arms over the counter. The smile on her face looked tired. Welcome, Midoriya-san. Inko smiled widely, ushering closer to the counter with hurried steps. How are you, Aanne? All right, Aanne answered half-heartedly, and Inko frowned, gaze flickering across the sea of plants and flowers. Is Natsumi-chan still at the hospital? Aanne nodded, staring when a basket was placed down on the counter. Her gaze rose to meet Inko's, those warm eyes looking so familiar. It made her heart clench. I cooked up some food for you. Inko patted the basket. You look so pale. You don't look like you've been eating properly. Then Inko cupped her own cheeks, shaking her head sorrowfully. Though I don't blame you. Shizu-san suffered a lot of injuries when he fell from that bridge. Don't pity him like he's weak. Aanne would have snapped, but she restrained. Inko Midoriya was the last person she could be angry with. Would you like to go upstairs, Midoriya-san? I can make us some floral tea. Inko smiled apologetically. I would love to, but I have to get going. I have a lot to cook tonight. Guests coming over. Oh, no. Inko waved a hand. She glanced down at the basket on the countertop, a soft giggle escaping her lips. Izuku handed me a list of things he wanted me to cook. Aanne blinked. Inko laughed faintly. He's a growing boy. He needs all the energy he can get, right? Right. Aanne responded, brows scrunching together. I haven't talked to Izuku much for the past few days. Is he doing all right? Inko tilted her head to the side, a thoughtful look on her face. Yes, he's fine. He seems rather busy, though. Busy? Aanne echoed, perplexed. She drummed her fingers on the counter. What's he so busy with? I'm not so sure. Inko admitted, a sigh escaping her lips before she smiled fondly. After that incident with that sludge villain, he's been quite busy and even a little exhausted. But I'm glad that he doesn't look so down all the time. It's as if my baby boy just found something in life that he wants to pursue, so I don't want to bother him much. Aanne pursed her lips, nodding her head in agreement. I see. I hope he's doing all right. Inko lifted her chin, a bright smile tugging her lips as she took a step back. Well, I should be leaving now. Give my best wishes to Natsumi-chan, all right. Thank you for the food, Aanne bowed her head, hearing Inko giggle from far away. Goodbye, Ayaka. Goodbye, Midoriya-san. The faint jingle ringing through the shop confirmed the woman's departure. Aanne sat up once more, teetering towards the basket. She reached ahead, dragging the basket before her. The warmth radiating against her palms told her that whatever Midoriya-san had cooked was still fresh. Her mouth watered, enhanced senses picking up the scent of juicy steaks and fried fish. Izuku knew how much she enjoyed meat. No wonder his mother had made this for her. He seems rather busy though. Aanne dropped the basket's lid, mind suddenly racing. What are you so busy with all of a sudden? Her train of thoughts halted as another jingle rang in the air. Aanne perked up, crimson hues snapping towards the shop's glass door. Did you forget something, Midoriya-san? From behind the looming sunflowers, a head of green emerged. Carmine eyes followed the movement, and Aanne's brows knitted together when a girl just around her age stood before the counter. Long, green vine-like hair framed her face, braided into a crown above her head. Dressed in a white sundress, the girl lifted her chin, clasping her hands together before she bowed. Good evening. This is Natsumi's garden, correct? Aanne watched her carefully, then nodded. Yeah, it is. The girl stood back up, forest green eyes wandering across the shop. I am here to meet Shizu Natsumi. That's my mother. Aanne folded her arms atop the counter. A client. But she isn't here right now. I can pass on a message if you like. The green-haired girl made a noise of acknowledgement, then pressed her hands against her chest. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Shiozaki Ibara. Aanne stared, dumbfounded as pure white light seemed to pour down from the heavens when Ibara held her arms out dramatically. A halo brightening above her green hair, Inara clasped her hands together. You see, my love of nature has brought me here. I was so mesmerized by the beauty of this shop when I stumbled in one day. I was in awe of the blessings God has bestowed upon us, like these flowers. The colors in his vast painting. White, angel-like wings manifested from Ibara's back as she raised a fist. Aanne blinked stupidly while the other continued in her trance state. So I asked your mother, Shizu-san, if she would bless me by allowing me to take care of this beauty that surrounds us. God bless her soul, for she said yes. So you're gonna work for free? Aanne deducted slowly. Hands slammed down on the countertop, and Ibara leaned forward on her palms. Their noses nearly brushed, Ibara gazing down at Aanne, who silently stared back. Sometimes we should do things simply for virtue instead of seeking benefits in return. Mama hired you for an extra hand here. I get it. Aanne deadpanned, looking unamused as those half-lidded green eyes continued staring down at her. Can you step away now? You're in my personal space. I see that you're in great pain. Aanne halted, her brows creasing, while Ibara stepped back, calm and collected. You are struggling internally. May God guide you to what you seek. A hand dug into the collar of her shirt, yanking her in. Ibara clutched the counter's round curb so she wouldn't topple forward. Her jaw tight and eyes frosty, Aanne glowered at the other girl. You know nothing about me. She wanted to sneer in that calm, relaxed face. But a warm, delicate hand settled on her own. Ibara blinked slowly, not fearful or amused, just calm and serene. If you would like to repent for your sins, I am here to listen. Sorry doesn't fix things, Aya. Her grip slackened. Aanne released Ibara's collar, hands dropping back into her lap. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Ibara hummed, smoothing out the creases of her flowy white dress. It's all right. Anger does make one act out of conduct. Aanne breathed out, leaping to her feet. She rounded the counter, making her way forward. Mossy green eyes watched her curiously when she paused near a glass door. Come on. I'll show you the plant nursery. Mountains of garbage and filth reached for the sky, the soft glow of the sun casting orange and rosy streaks across the faint pale clouds. The scent of salt in the air, Izuku planted his feet more firmly in the sandy beach, inhaling deeply. He gazed at the sea behind the piles of rubbish, sparkling and never ending under the setting sun. He pressed a fist against his chin, a sigh escaping his lips. 9 months. His eyes shone with determination, bright emeralds staring ahead. 9 months, and I'll take the first step to become a hero. From far away, he could make out the tufts of golden hair, a smile tugging his lips when All Might raised a spindly arm to wave at him. But then the hero quickly dropped his hand and swiftly spun around, a look of confusion coloring his face. Izuku stared flatly. Why did All Might just? Watch ya doin' here, Izuku tilde. Warm breath ghosted over the back of his neck, and Izuku squawked, leaping a foot in the air. He tripped over his own feet, stumbling on the sandy ground. Fingers dug into the back of his sky blue tracksuit, holding him mid-fall. Half away from hitting the ground face first, Izuku gulped. Slight fear tingled down his spine, and he prayed for it to go away. There was a single tug, allowing him to settle back on his feet. Did I scare you? Aanne inquired, amused while Izuku shifted to properly face her. He laughed awkwardly, rubbing the back of his head. And no, why would you scare me? Aanne clasped her hands behind her back, leaning forward as her gaze swept across the beach. So what are you hiding from me, Izuku? Hiding? Izuku echoed, voice slightly shrill. I couldn't possibly hide anything from why. 2 fingers were suddenly held in front of his face. He blinked owlishly, lifting his gaze to meet those curious carmine eyes. There can be 2 reasons for this, Aanne declared, counting off. 1. You're doing something illegal. What? And no. 2. You got a girlfriend, and you're hiding her from me. Girlfriend? Izuku shrieked, face going all warm. Aanne's eyes sparkled, taking in his flushed face. Izuku waved his arms frantically. No, you got it all wrong, I swear. A giggle bubbling from her lips, Aanne grinned toothily. I'm just joking, Izuku. Calm down. Izuku sighed softly, shoulders slumping as he closed his eyes. Don't joke with me like that, Ayakin. Something wet and cold skimmed against his cheek, emerald green eyes snapping open as he jerked his face away. Aanne offered a friendly smile, holding out 2 packets of ice cream. She tipped them towards him, gesturing towards the shore with a slight incline of her head. Walk with me? I'm sorry I haven't been answering your texts. It's all right. Aanne tugged the wrapper off her popsicle, flicking it in the air. We've been through a lot since that sludge villain incident. Izuku's gaze followed how the wrapper fluttered in the air, settling down on the wet beach. So this is how this place turned into a dump. Eat it before it melts. Oh. His attention snapped back to the watermelon-sliced popsicle in his hand. He took a tentative lick, wincing when Aanne chomped down on her own treat, biting away a big red portion. She chewed as they both continued leisurely walking down the shore, shoes and popsicles in their hands, while the cold water lapped at their feet every now and then. The wet sand stuck to the skin of their feet, leaving behind their imprints in the sand. Izuku pursed his lips, wind teasing through his fluffy green locks. I'm sorry about what happened to Shizu-san. What are you sorry for? she answered nonchalantly, bouncing her shoulders. But he could feel the faint tightness in her voice, the tension in her muscles. It's not like it was your fault. Izuku chewed on the insides of his cheek, gazing down at the melting popsicle in his hand. Aanne tore away another piece from her own popsicle, the watermelon slice reduced to just a small morsel. Silence befilled them, just the sound of water slipping past their ankles from time to time and the honks of seagulls. I'm sorry for what I said that day. Emerald eyes flared up in surprise, then glanced sideways. Aanne quietly chewed on the end of her popsicle stick, dark crimson eyes flickering his way. It wasn't my place to tell you what you can and what you can't become. You said what I've heard from everyone before. Izuku smiled kindly, gazing ahead at the seemingly never-ending shore. You don't have to apologize for it. I'm not like everyone. Aanne mumbled around the wooden stick in her mouth. I wanted to be the person you could trust, though. Someone who you could lean on. She let out a bitter laugh, kicking at the ground. Tired, crimson eyes met wide emerald green, and Aanne cracked a lopsided smile. I'm sorry. You don't have to be so hard on yourself, Izuku said quickly, waving the melting popsicle around. He bit down his tongue, eyes softening, and he smiled, all bright and easy, just like whenever he was around her. You're always by my side, Ayakin. I love you too much to be mad at you cause of something like that. He blinked, mouth clamping shut instantly. Warmth crept up from the back of his neck, coloring the tips of ears when a shoulder pressed against his own. He teetered slightly, slowly turning his head to meet Aanne's curious gaze. She smirked coyly, and he must be imagining the faint blush swept across her nose. Izu-kun, was that a confessio? Will you apply to Yuyui too? Izuku interrupted suddenly, heart beating in his ears like a drum as he cursed his big, rambling mouth. Why, you did get the recommendation later. I mean, I know you don't want to be a hero, but maybe you could just give the test for fun. There isn't much information on how Yuyui even takes the recommendation exams, which makes sense since they want to test their most talented candidates. Oh. Izuku pouted, rubbing at his cheek where he had been pinched, while Aanne plucked the dripping popsicle from his fingers. She licked away the melting red streaks. Izuku flushed, his protests dying on how that was his treat, and he was just eating that. I'm gonna apply. His eyes widening to the size of dinner plates, he stared in surprise. You are? Yeah, Aanne admitted, gaze suddenly hardening as she stared ahead. I'm going to apply and I'm going to get accepted. Izuku creased his brows. But you said that you weren't interested in the hero line. That doesn't matter anymore, she waved a hand in the air. What matters is that I get accepted into that school. And then she halted, so Izuku stopped as well. Bright, ruby red eyes peered up into his before Aanne grinned. I'm not Bakugo, but... She held out a fist, head tipped to the side. Let's be heroes together. Izuku laughed warmly, raising his fist and brushing their knuckles together. Together. Though he shuffled back slightly when Aanne inched closer, her hand hovering above her head before brushing against his own. Ayakin. Would you look at that? Aanne rolled back on the balls of her heels, a teasing grin tugging her face as she bit away the popsicle. We're finally the same height. Guess you're not looking down anymore. She tossed the popsicle stick away on the hand, raising a brow when Izuku scrambled to pick it up. Don't litter like that, Ayakin. What do you mean? This place is a total dump. Still not okay to litter like this. Geez, you're acting like you're the one who's gonna clean it up later. A slight pause followed, and Izuku cleared his throat, sighing internally. But still. If only, she knew. And I'm back from the dead woohoo tilde. Have this chapter as a peace offering pleth, for I am slowly getting back into updates. I also have some cutout scenes from this fic, which I wasn't sure where to put in. So I'm just going to add them in the end as extra scenes that happened in the storyline. But I wasn't sure where to put W. Enjoy this piece of them being small kids and playing around. Point 3. Winner and loser. Rock, paper, scissors. Shoot. Her muscles tensed, red hues darting between the small fist and open hand, and she clenched her jaw when the latter quickly shot forward, striking the other boy across his face in a loud thwack. Chortles broke around them, and Aanne let out a growl, gripping the wooden table corners in a vice grip. TCH. You're such a sore loser, Deku. Bakugo grinned toothily. Can't even win in a lousy game like this. Pathetic. Izuku rubbed at his reddening cheek. A frown etched on his face, while the blonde stood proud, his lackeys ushering him from all sides. The chubby one batted his crimson wings excitedly, looking at the taller boy in awe. Kakin is so cool. He's never ever lost in anything. That's 'cause I'm a born winner, Bakugo bragged, puffing his chest out with pride. You all eat shit in front of me. The boy with long, slim fingers scratched his cheek, glancing at the lone girl in the room. Looks like Deku's dog isn't that happy about you hitting him, Kakin. All eyes turned to the lone girl in the classroom, and Aanne tightened her hold on the wooden desk. Cracks webbed in it through the corners as she glared at them with unmasked anger. Bakugo clicked his tongue, a smirk plastered on his face firmly. What? Deku's dog wants to play too? Like I'll lose to a jackass like you, Aanne fired back, and Bakugo scowled slightly, then smirked again before holding his fist out. We'll see about that. Izuku peeked from behind the blonde, brows knitted together in worry. Iakin. Kakin. No, don't. I got this, Izu-kun. Aanne interrupted, walking around the desk and near the spiky-haired boy. She was still taller than them, though the boy with long, thin fingers was almost her height. You just relax, okay? Bakugo narrowed his eyes, curling his fingers, and they both jerked their fists at the same time. Rock, paper, scissors. Shoot. Aanne's lips curled downwards at the closed fist in front of her scissors, and Bakugo grinned wickedly, his lackeys cheering him from the background as he raised a smoke-sputtering fist near his face. You know the rules, catface. The girl simply snorted, a careless look on her face as she clasped her hands behind her back. PFT, do your worst, Bakugo. His teeth gritting together at the lack of fear from her, Bakugo drew his fist back, only to swiftly shift his weight to the other foot, and brought a blazing palm hard across Izuku's face instead. The green-haired boy gasped, toppling into the school chairs nearby, though the clatter didn't seem to catch anyone's attention from outside, as the mundane school noises kept on going, unbothered by the fact that there were children in an empty classroom, while the rest were enjoying themselves in the playground. Bakugo cracked his knuckles, grinning from ear to ear, when Izuku whimpered meekly as he lay ungracefully sprawled on the floor, his leg dangling off a plastic chair. Izu-kun? Footsteps ushered forward, hands pushing away the fallen furniture as concerned red eyes peered down at him worriedly, then snapped to the troublesome trio cackling in mirth. Bakugo rewarded the girl with a menacing grin, and the ends of Aanne's lips pulled back into a snarl as she crouched slightly, flexing her fingers, but a hand shot forward, grabbing and gently tugging at the edge of her plain blue school skirt. Iakin, please, no. Izuku murmured softly, his left cheek burning a bright red, and Aanne remembered her father's rough hand hitting her in the hospital hallway, her cheek throbbing and the sting of hot tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, Papa. Laughter from the other side of the room broke her train of thoughts as she blinked, shooting an icy glare Bakugo's way, who folded his arms behind his head and grinned toothily. That teaches you losers to never challenge me. Yeah, nobody challenges Kakin. He's the best. Shut up, you damn extras. Bakugo snapped at his lackeys, both of them quickly quietening down before he gazed nonchalantly at the pair on the other side of the room. That's a lesson for you, cat-faced. Ever try to challenge me, and I'll crush you and that damned Deku under my foot like the insects you are. Got it? Aanne felt her blood boil. I'll rip you in half, you ass. Another tug at her skirt's corner made her bite her tongue, red eyes hardening into rubies when Bakugo released a loud snort, an amused look on his face as he turned around, making his way towards the door. TCH, just like a good little dog. His wannabe friends sniggered under their breaths, tossing cheeky grins over their shoulders as they followed the ash blonde. The door closed with a soft click, footsteps making their way further, and Aanne balled her hands into fists, scowling angrily. Why didn't you let me knock their teeth in? Izuku grabbed a hold of the leg of a chair and pulled himself into a sitting position on the floor, wincing when pain shot across his cheek. Oh. A sigh escaping her lips, Aanne ran a hand through her hair. Come on, Izuku. Let's take you to the nurse's office again. No, I'm fine, he answered smoothly, crossing his legs on the cool floor as his shoulders slumped dejectedly. Don't want Kaken to get into more trouble. A moment of silence passed, Aanne gazing down at the boy on the floor before she sighed heavily, dropping down on her knees. Fingers reached upwards, brushing against the bruising cheek, and Izuku gritted his teeth, flinching away painfully. Aanne withdrew her hand, a concerned look on her face. Was Katsuki really ever your friend? Yeah, he answered quietly. Aanne settled down on the floor as well, tilting her head to the side as her brows knitted in confusion. Then why is he so mean to you? I don't know, Izuku mumbled, gaze focused downward. He let out a sigh, green locks brushing across his forehead. Kaken used to be so nice. Me and him always had so much fun, and then he got his quirk, but… He paused briefly, thin bony fingers curling into a fist against the cold floor. But I didn't get mine. A single tear hit the tiles, and Aanne frowned as Izuku wiped his sleeve across his watery eyes. He changed so much suddenly. We were friends, Ayaken. Why? Why did Kaken had to change like that? Hands cupped below his chin, cradling his face and making him flinch when fingers accidentally touched his bruised cheek as his face was squished and his lips were pushed into a pout. Round, wide green eyes stared as Aanne cradled his face between her rough hands. Red eyes focused solemnly as she spoke with determination. Who cares about him now? You've got me, right? He blinked dumbly, then laughed aloud despite the burn on his left cheek. Yeah, I've got you. Aanne cracked him a bright grin, drawing her hands back, and he watched, puzzled as she rose a fist near her face, crimson hues glittering. Want to play with me this time? It took a moment or two for him to understand what she was saying, but when he did, a smile curled the corners of his lips upward, and he held out a closed fist of his own. Sure. A toothy smile greeted him in return, and the two shook their fists thrice in the air. Rock, paper, scissors. Shoot. Scissors answered his paper, and Izuku let out a chuckle, his shoulders shaking in slight mirth. Wow, Kaken was right. I even suck at this game. Close your eyes. Izuku halted, his jaw falling open a bit because of the order as he stared at his friend. Aanne cracked her knuckles, a cocky smirk curling her lips upwards. You know the rules, Izuku. She grinned, briefly flashing the sharp canines hidden inside her mouth. Close your eyes. The boy shut his mouth, swallowing as he nodded slowly. His eyes falling shut, he gripped the end of his shirt in his hands as he began mumbling loudly. Can you not hit the side Kaken did, please? It doesn't hurt that much, but still. Warm and soft lips lightly skimmed across his freckled cheek, and forest green eyes snapped open just as Aanne settled back on the floor, smiling widely while Izuku felt the tip of his ears burn, a bright shade of red along with the rest of his heated face. He sputtered a string of intangible sentences, then slapped his hands over his flushed face. Ayachin. At least your whole face is red now, right? The girl supplied shamelessly, giggling while he continued whining with his arms shielding his face. though she leaned down on her knees, reaching ahead, and the boy came to a halt with his whines and mumbles, as his arm was pushed away from his face, deep green clashing with blood red. "Don't worry, Izuku." Aanne awarded him with a friendly smile, a single sharp teeth poking out from under her upper lips. "I'm not gonna change like him."